This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting. Prologue. All that I have written so far about Doctor Dolittle, I heard long after it happened from those who had known him. Indeed, a great deal of it took place before I was born. But I now come to set down that part of the great man's life which I myself saw and took part in. Many years ago, the doctor gave me permission to do this. But we were both of us so busy then voyaging around the world, having adventures and filling notebooks full of natural history, that I never seemed to get time to sit down and write of our doings. Now, of course, when I'm quite an old man, my memory isn't so good any more. But whenever I am in doubt, and have to hesitate and think, I always ask Polynesia, the parrot. That wonderful bird, she is now 250 years old, sits on the top of my desk, usually humming sailor songs to herself, while I write this book. And as everyone who ever met her knows, Polynesia's memory is the most marvelous memory in the world. If there is any happening I'm not quite sure of, she's always able to put me right, to tell me exactly how it took place, who was there, and everything about it. In fact, sometimes I almost think I ought to say that this book was written by Polynesia instead of me. Very well then, I will begin. And first of all, I must tell you something about myself, and how I came to meet the doctor. End of prologue.
Part 1, Chapter 1 of the Voyages of Doctor Dolittle. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Lucy Burgoyne. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting. Part 1, the first chapter. The cobbler's son. My name was Tommy Stubbins, son of Jack Stubbins, the cobbler of Puddleby on the Marsh, and I was 9.5 years old. At that time Puddleby was only quite a small town. A river ran through the middle of it, and over this river there was a very old stone bridge, called Kingsbridge, which led you from the market-place on one side to the churchyard on the other. Sailing ships came up this river from the sea and anchored near the bridge. I used to go down and watch the sailors unloading the ships upon the river wall. The sailors sang strange songs as they pulled upon the ropes, and I learned these songs by heart. And I would sit on the river wall with my feet dangling over the water and sing with the men, pretending to myself that I too was a sailor. For I longed always to sail away with those brave ships when they turned their backs on Puddleby Church and went creeping down the river again, across the wide lonely marshes to the sea. I longed to go with them out into the world, to seek my fortune in foreign lands, Africa, India, China and Peru. When they got round the bend in the river and the water was hidden from view, you could still see their huge brown sails towering over the roofs of the town, moving onward slowly, like some gentle giants that walked among the houses without noise. What strange things would they have seen, I wondered, when next they came back to anchor at Kingsbridge. And, dreaming of the lands I had never seen, I'd sit on there, watching till they were out of sight. 3 great friends I had in Puddleby in those days. One was Joe, the mussel man, who lived in a tiny hut by the edge of the water under the bridge. This old man was simply marvellous at making things. I never saw a man so clever with his hands. He used to mend my toy ships for me which I sailed upon the river. He built windmills out of packing cases and barrel staves, and he could make the most wonderful kites from old umbrellas. Joe would sometimes take me in his mussel boat, and when the tide was running out, we would paddle down the river as far as the edge of the sea to get mussels and lobsters to sell. And out there on the cold lonely marshes we would see wild geese flying, and curlews and redshanks and many other kinds of seabirds that live among the samphire and the long grass of the great salt fen. And as we crept up the river in the evening, when the tide had turned, we would see the lights on Kingsbridge twinkle in the dusk, reminding us of tea time and warm fires. Another friend I had was Matthew Mugg, the cat's meat man. He was a funny old person with a bad squint. He looked rather awful, but he was really quite nice to talk to. He knew everybody in Puddleby, and he knew all the dogs and all the cats. In those times being a cat's meat man was a regular business, and you could see one nearly any day going through the streets with a wooden tray full of pieces of meat stuck on skewers, crying, "Meat, M-E-A-T." People paid him to give this meat to their cats and dogs instead of feeding them on dog biscuits or the scraps from the table. I enjoyed going round with old Matthew and seeing the cats and dogs come running to the garden gates whenever they heard his call. Sometimes he let me give the meat to the animals myself, and I thought this was great fun. He knew a lot about dogs, and he would tell me the names of the different kinds as we went through the town. He had several dogs of his own. One, a whippet, was a very fast runner, and Matthew used to win prizes with her at the Saturday coursing races. Another, a terrier, was a fine ratter. The cat's meat man used to make a business of rat catching for the millers and farmers, as well as his other trade of selling cat's meat. My third great friend was Luke the Hermit, but of him I will tell you more later on. I did not go to school because my father was not rich enough to send me, but I was extremely fond of animals. So I used to spend my time collecting birds' eggs and butterflies, fishing in the river, rambling through the countryside after blackberries and mushrooms, and helping the mussel-man mend his nets. Yes, it was a pleasant life I lived in those days long ago, though of course I did not think so then. I was 9.5 years old, and, like all boys, I wanted to grow up, not knowing how well off I was with no cares and nothing to worry me. Always I longed for the time when I should be allowed to leave my father's house, to take passage in one of those brave ships, to sail down the river through the misty marshes to the sea, out into the world to seek my fortune. End of chapter 1.
Part 1, Chapter 2 of the Voyages of Doctor Dolittle. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle. Part 1. The second chapter. I hear of the great naturalist. One early morning in the springtime, when I was wandering among the hills at the back of the town, I happened to come upon a hawk with a squirrel in its claws. I was standing on a rock, and the squirrel was fighting very hard for its life. The hawk was so frightened when I came upon it suddenly like this, that it dropped the poor creature and flew away. I picked up the squirrel, and found that 2 of its legs were badly hurt, so I carried it in my arms back to the town. When I came to the bridge, I went into the mussel-man's hut and asked him if he could do anything for it. Joe put on his spectacles and examined it carefully. Then he shook his head. "Your critter's got a broken leg," he said, "and another badly cut and all. I can mend your boats, Tom, but I haven't the tools nor the learning to make a broken squirrel seaworthy. This is a job for a surgeon, for a right smart one and all. There be only one man I know who could save your critter's life, and that's John Dolittle." "Who is John Dolittle?" I asked. "Is he a vet?" "No," said the mussel man. "He's no vet. Dr. Dolittle is a naturalist." "What's a naturalist?" "A naturalist," said Joe, putting away his glasses and starting to fill his pipe, "is a man who knows all about animals and butterflies and plants and rocks and all. John Dolittle is a very great naturalist. I'm surprised you never heard of him, and you daft over animals. He knows a whole lot about shellfish. That I know from my own knowledge. He's a quiet man and don't talk much, but there's folks who do say he's the greatest naturalist in the world." "Where does he live?" I asked. "Over on Oxenthorpe Road, t'other side of town. Don't know just which house it is, but most anyone crossed there could tell you, I reckon. Go and see him. He's a great man." So I thanked the mussel man, took up my squirrel again, and started off towards the Oxenthorpe Road. The first thing I heard as I came into the marketplace was someone calling, "Meat! Meat!" "There's Matthew Mugg," I said to myself. "He'll know where this doctor lives. Matthew knows everyone." So I hurried across the marketplace and caught him up. "Matthew," I said, "do you know Dr. Dolittle?" "Do I know Dr. Dolittle?" said he. "Well, I should think I do. I know him as well as I know my own wife. Better, I sometimes think. He's a great man, a very great man." "Can you show me where he lives?" I asked. "I want to take this squirrel to him. It has a broken leg." "Certainly," said the cat's meat man. "I'll be going right by his house directly. Come along and I'll show you." So off we went together. "Oh, I've known John Dolittle for years and years," said Matthew, as we made our way out of the marketplace. "But I'm pretty sure he ain't home just now. He's away on a voyage. But he's liable to be back any day. I'll show you his house, and then you'll know where to find him." All the way down the Oxenthorpe Road, Matthew hardly stopped talking about his great friend, Dr. John Dolittle, M.D. He talked so much that he forgot all about calling out, "Meat!" until we both suddenly noticed that we had a whole procession of dogs following us patiently. "Where did the doctor go to on this voyage?" I asked as Matthew handed round the meat to them. "I couldn't tell you," he answered. "Nobody never knows where he goes, nor when he's going, nor when he's coming back. He lives all alone except for his pets. He's made some great voyages and some wonderful discoveries. Last time he came back, he told me he'd found a tribe of red Indians in the Pacific Ocean. Lived on 2 islands, they did. The husbands lived on one island, and the wives lived on the other. Sensible people, some of them savages. They only met once a year, when the husbands came over to visit their wives for a great feast. Christmas time, most likely. Yes, he's a wonderful man, is the doctor. And as for the animals, well, there ain't no one knows as much about 'em as what he does." How did he get to know so much about the animals? I asked. The cat's meat man stopped and leant down to whisper in my ear. He talks their language. The animals' language? I cried. Why, certainly, said Matthew. All animals have some kind of a language. Some sorts talk more than others. Some only speak in sign language, like deaf and dumb. But the doctor, he understands them all, birds as well as animals. We keep it a secret, though, him and me, because folks only laugh at you when you speak of it. Why, he can even write animal language. He reads aloud to his pets. He's wrote history books in monkey talk, poetry in canary language, and comic songs for magpies to sing. It's a fact. He's now busy learning the language of the shellfish, but he says it's hard work, and he has caught some terrible colds, holding his head underwater so much. He's a great man. He certainly must be, I said. I do wish he were home so I could meet him. Well, there's his house. Look, said the cat's meat man. That little one at the bend in the road there, the one high up, like it was sitting on the wall above the street. We were now come beyond the edge of the town, and the house that Matthew pointed out was quite a small one, standing by itself. There seemed to be a big garden around it, and this garden was much higher than the road. So you had to go up a flight of steps in the wall before you reached the front gate at the top. I could see that there were many fine fruit trees in the garden, for their branches hung down over the wall in places. But the wall was so high, I could not see anything else. When we reached the house, Matthew went up the steps to the front gate, and I followed him. I thought he was going to go into the garden, but the gate was locked. A dog came running down from the house, and he took several pieces of meat, which the cat's meat man pushed through the bars of the gate, and some paper bags full of corn and bran. I noticed that this dog did not stop to eat the meat, as any ordinary dog would have done, but he took all the things back to the house and disappeared. He had a curious wide collar round his neck, which looked as though it were made of brass or something. Then we came away. The doctor isn't back yet, said Matthew, or the gate wouldn't be locked. What were all those things in paper bags you gave the dog? I asked. Oh, those were provisions, said Matthew. Things for the animals to eat. The doctor's house is simply full of pets. I give the things to the dog while the doctor's away, and the dog gives them to the other animals. And what was that curious collar he was wearing round his neck? That's a solid gold dog collar, said Matthew. It was given to him when he was with the doctor on one of his voyages, long ago. He saved a man's life. How long has the doctor had him? I asked. Oh, a long time. Jip's getting pretty old now. That's why the doctor doesn't take him on his voyages any more. He leaves him behind to take care of the house. Every Monday and Thursday I bring the food to the gate here and give it to him through the bars. He never lets anyone come inside the garden while the doctor's away. Not even me, though he knows me well. But you'll always be able to tell if the doctor's back or not, because if he is, the gate will surely be open. So I went off home to my father's house and put my squirrel to bed in an old wooden box full of straw. and there I nursed him myself and took care of him as best I could till the time should come when the doctor should return. And every day I went to the little house with the big garden on the edge of the town and tried the gate to see if it were locked. Sometimes the dog, Jip, would come down to the gate to meet me, but though he always wagged his tail and seemed glad to see me, he never let me come inside the garden. End of the second chapter. Read by Dennis Sayers in Modesto, California for LibriVox. Winter 2006. The third chapter of The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting. The third chapter. The Doctor's Home. One morning towards the end of April, my father asked me to take some shoes which he had mended to a house on the other side of town. They were for a Colonel Bellows, who was very particular. I found the house and rang the bell at the front door. The colonel opened it, stuck out a very red face, and said, "Go round to the tradesman's entrance. Go to the back door." Then he slammed the door shut. I felt inclined to throw the shoes into the middle of his flower bed. But I thought my father might be angry, so I didn't. I went round to the back door, and there the colonel's wife met me and took the shoes from me. She looked a timid little woman and had her hands all over flour, as though she was making bread. She seemed to be terribly afraid of her husband, whom I could still hear stumping round the house somewhere, grunting indignantly because I had come to the front door. Then she asked me in a whisper if I would have a bun and a glass of milk, and I said, "Yes, please." After I had eaten the bun and milk, I thanked the colonel's wife and came away. Then I thought that before I went home I would go and see if the doctor had come back yet. I had been to his house once already that morning, but I thought I'd just like to go and take another look. My squirrel wasn't getting any better, and I was beginning to be worried about him. So I turned into the Oxenthorpe Road and started off towards the doctor's house. On the way, I noticed that the sky was clouding over, and that it looked as though it might rain. I reached the gate and found it still locked. I felt very discouraged. I had been coming here every day for a week now. The dog, Jip, came to the gate and wagged his tail as usual, and then sat down and watched me closely to see that I didn't get in. I began to fear that my squirrel would die before the doctor came back. I turned away sadly, went down the steps onto the road, and turned towards home again. I wondered if it were supper time yet. Of course, I had no watch of my own, but I noticed a gentleman coming towards me down the road, and when he got nearer, I saw it was the colonel out for a walk. He was all wrapped up in smart overcoats and mufflers and bright-colored gloves. It was not a very cold day, but he had so many clothes on, he looked like a pillow inside of a roll of blankets. I asked him if he would please tell me the time. He stopped, grunted, and glared down at me, his red face growing redder still, and when he spoke, it sounded like the cork coming out of a ginger beer bottle. "Do you imagine for one moment," he spluttered, "that I am going to get myself all unbuttoned just to tell a little boy like you the time?" And he went stumping down the street, grunting harder than ever. I stood still a moment, looking after him, and wondering how old I would have to have him go to the trouble of getting his watch out. And then All of a sudden, the rain came down in torrents. I have never seen it rain so hard. It got dark, almost like night. The wind began to blow. The thunder rolled. The lightning flashed, and in a moment the gutters of the road were flowing like a river. There was no place handy to take shelter, so I put my head down against the driving wind and started to run towards home. I hadn't gone very far when my head bumped into something soft, and I sat down suddenly on the pavement. I looked up to see whom I had run into, and there in front of me, sitting on the wet pavement like myself, was a little round man with a very kind face. He wore a shabby high hat, and in his hand he had a small black bag. "I'm very sorry," I said. "I had my head down, and I didn't see you coming." To my great surprise, instead of getting angry at being knocked down, the little man began to laugh. "You know, this reminds me," he said, "of a time once when I was in India. I ran full tilt into a woman in a thunderstorm, but she was carrying a pitcher of molasses on her head, and I had treacle in my hair for weeks afterwards. The flies followed me everywhere." "I didn't hurt you, did I?" "No," I said. "I'm all right." "It was just as much my fault as it was yours, you know," said the little man. "I had my head down, too. But look here, we mustn't sit talking like this. You must be soaked." "I know I am. How far have you got to go?" "My home is on the other side of town," I said, as we picked ourselves up. "My goodness, but that was a wet pavement," said he. "And I declare it's coming down worse than ever. Come along to my house and get dried. A storm like this can't last." He took hold of my hand, and we started running back down the road together. As we ran, I began to wonder who this funny little man could be, and where he lived. I was a perfect stranger to him, and yet he was taking me to his own home to get dried. Such a change after the old red-faced colonel who had refused even to tell me the time. Presently we stopped. "Here we are," he said. I looked up to see where we were, and found myself back at the foot of the steps leading to the little house with the big garden. My new friend was already running up the steps and opening the gate with some keys he took from his pocket. Surely, I thought, this cannot be the great Dr. Dolittle himself. I suppose, after hearing so much about him, I had expected someone very tall and strong and marvelous. It was hard to believe that this funny little man with the kind smiling face could be really he. Yet here he was, sure enough, running up the steps and opening the very gate which I had been watching for so many days. The dog, Jip, came rushing out and started jumping up on him and barking with happiness. The rain was splashing down heavier than ever. "Are you Dr. Dolittle?" I shouted as we sped up the short garden path to the house. "Yes, I'm Dr. Dolittle," said he, opening the front door with the same bunch of keys. "Get in. Don't bother about wiping your feet. Never mind the mud. Take it in with you. Get in, out of the rain." I popped in, he and Jip following. Then he slammed the door to behind us. The storm had made it dark enough outside, but inside the house, with the door closed, it was as black as night. Then began the most extraordinary noise that I have ever heard. It sounded like all sorts and kinds of animals and birds, calling and squeaking and screeching all at the same time. I could hear things trundling down the stairs and hurrying along passages. Somewhere in the dark, a duck was quacking, a cock was crowing, a dove was cooing, An owl was hooting, a lamb was bleating, and Jip was barking. I felt birds' wings fluttering and fanning near my face. Things kept bumping into my legs and nearly upsetting me. The whole front hall seemed to be filling up with animals. The noise, together with the roaring of the rain, was tremendous, and I was beginning to grow a little scared when I felt the doctor take hold of my arm and shout into my ear, "Don't be alarmed. Don't be frightened. These are just some of my pets. I've been away 3 months, and they are glad to see me home again. Stand still where you are till I strike a light." My gracious, what a storm! Just listen to that thunder. So there I stood in the pitch-black dark, while all kinds of animals, which I couldn't see, chattered and jostled around me. It was a curious and a funny feeling. I had often wondered, when I had looked in from the front gate, what Dr. Dolittle would be like, and what the funny little house would have inside it. But I never imagined it would be anything like this. Yet, somehow, after I had felt the doctor's hand upon my arm, I was not frightened, only confused. It all seemed like some queer dream, and I was beginning to wonder if I was really awake, when I heard the doctor speaking again. "My blessed matches are all wet. They won't strike. Have you got any?" "No, I'm afraid I haven't," I called back. "Never mind," said he. "Perhaps Dab-Dab can raise us a light somewhere." Then the doctor made some funny clicking noises with his tongue, and I heard someone trundle up the stairs again and start moving about in the rooms above. Then we waited quite a while without anything happening. "Will the light be long in coming?" I asked. "Some animal is sitting on my foot, and my toes are going to sleep." "No, only a minute," said the doctor. "She'll be back in a minute." And just then I saw the first glimmerings of a light around the landing above. At once all the animals kept quiet. "I thought you lived alone," I said to the doctor. "So I do," said he. "It is Dab-Dab who is bringing the light." I looked up the stairs, trying to make out who was coming. I could not see around the landing, but I heard the most curious footstep on the upper flight. It sounded like someone hopping down from one step to the other, as though he were using only one leg. As the light came lower, it grew brighter and began to throw strange, jumping shadows on the walls. "Ah, at last," said the doctor. "Good old Dab-Dab." And then I thought I really must be dreaming, for there, craning her neck round the bend of the landing, hopping down the stairs on one leg, came a spotless white duck, and in her right foot she carried a lighted candle. End of the 3rd chapter. Read by Dennis Sayers in Modesto, California, for LibriVox. Winter 2007.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Carl, St. Louis, Missouri, July 2007. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting. Part 1, Chapter 4. The Whiff-Waff. When at last I could look around me, I found that the hall was indeed simply full of animals. It seemed to me that almost every kind of creature from the countryside must be there. A pigeon, a white rat, an owl, a badger, a jackdaw. There was even a small pig, just in from the rainy garden, carefully wiping his feet on the mat, while the light from the candle glistened on his wet pink back. The doctor took the candlestick from the duck and turned to me. "Look here," he said, "you must get those wet clothes off. By the way, what is your name?" "Tommy Stubbins," I said. "Oh, Are you the son of Jacob Stubbins, the shoemaker?" "Yes," I said. "Excellent bootmaker, your father," said the doctor. "You see these?" And he held up his right foot to show me the enormous boots he was wearing. "Your father made me those boots 4 years ago, and I've been wearing them ever since. Perfectly wonderful boots. Well now, look here, Stubbins. You've got to change those wet things in quick. Wait a moment till I get some more candles lit, and then we'll go upstairs and find some dry clothes. You'll have to wear an old suit of mine till we can get yours dry again by the kitchen fire." So presently, when more candles had been lighted round different parts of the house, we went upstairs, and when we came into a bedroom, the doctor opened a big wardrobe and took out 2 suits of old clothes. These we put on. Then we carried our wet ones down to the kitchen and started a fire in the big chimney. The coat of the doctor's which I was wearing was so large for me that I kept treading on my own coat-tails while I was helping to fetch the wood up from the cellar. But very soon we had a huge, big fire blazing up the chimney, and we hung our wet clothes round on chairs. "Now let's cook some supper," said the doctor. "You'll stay and have supper with me, Stubbins, of course?" Already I was beginning to be very fond of this funny little man who called me Stubbins instead of Tommy, or little lad. I did so hate to be called little lad. This man seemed to begin right away treating me as though I were a grown-up friend of his, and when he asked me to stop and have supper with him, I felt terribly proud and happy. But I suddenly remembered that I had not told my mother that I would be out late, so very sadly I answered, "Thank you very much. I would like to stay, but I'm afraid that my mother will begin to worry and wonder where I am if I don't get back." "Oh, but my dear Stubbins," said the doctor, throwing another log of wood on the fire, "your clothes aren't dry yet. You'll have to wait for them, won't you? By the time they are ready to put on, we will have supper cooked and eaten. Did you see where I put my bag?" "I think it's still in the hall," I said. "I'll go and see." I found the bag near the front door. It was made of black leather and looked very, very old. One of its latches was broken, and it was tied up round the middle with a piece of string. "Thank you," said the doctor when I brought it to him. "Was that bag all the luggage you had for your voyage?" I asked. "Yes," said the doctor, as he undid the piece of string. "I don't believe in a lot of baggage. It's such a nuisance. Life's too short to fuss with it. And it isn't really necessary, you know. Where did I put those sausages?" The doctor was feeling about inside the bag. First he brought out a loaf of new bread. Next came a glass jar with a curious metal top to it. He held this up to the light very carefully before he set it down upon the table, and I could see that there was some strange little water creature swimming about inside. At last the doctor brought out a pound of sausages. "Now," he said, "all we want is a frying pan." We went into the scullery, and there we found some pots and pans hanging against the wall. The doctor took down the frying pan. It was quite rusty on the inside. "Dear me, just look at that," said he. "That's the worst of being away so long. The animals are very good and keep the house wonderfully clean as far as they can. Dab-Dab is a perfect marvel as a housekeeper. But some things, of course, they can't manage. Never mind, we'll soon clean it up. You'll find some silver sand down there under the sink, Stubbins. Just hand it up to me, will you?" In a few moments we had the pan all shiny and bright, and the sausages were put over the kitchen fire, and a beautiful frying smell went all through the house. While the doctor was busy at the cooking, I went and took another look at the funny little creature swimming about in the glass jar. "What is this animal?" I asked. "Oh, that," said the doctor, turning around. "That's a whiff-waff. Its full name is Hippocampus pipitopatus, but the natives just call it a whiff-waff, on account of the way it waves its tail swimming, I imagine. That's what I went on this last voyage for, to get that. You see, I'm very busy just now trying to learn the language of the shellfish. They have languages. Of that I feel sure. I can talk a little shark language and porpoise dialect myself, but what I particularly want to learn now is shellfish." "Why?" I asked. "Well, you see, Some of the shellfish are the oldest kind of animals in the world that we know of. We find their shells in the rocks, turned to stone, thousands of years old. So I feel quite sure that if I could only get to talk their language, I should be able to learn a whole lot about what the world was like ages and ages and ages ago. You see? But couldn't some of the other animals tell you as well? I don't think so, said the doctor, prodding the sausages with a fork. To be sure, the monkeys I knew in Africa some time ago were very helpful in telling me about bygone days, but they only went back 1,000 years or so. No, I am certain that the oldest history in the world is to be had from the shellfish, and from them only. You see, most of the other animals that were alive in those very ancient times have now become extinct. Have you learned any shellfish language yet? I asked. No, I've only just begun. I wanted this particular kind of a pipefish because he is half a shellfish and half an ordinary fish. I went all the way to the eastern Mediterranean after him. But I'm very much afraid he isn't going to be a great deal of help to me. To tell you the truth, I'm rather disappointed in his appearance. He doesn't look very intelligent, does he? No, he doesn't, I agreed. Ah, said the doctor, sausages are done to a turn. Come along, hold your plate near, and let me give you some. Then we sat down at the kitchen table and started a hearty meal. It was a wonderful kitchen, that. I had many meals there afterward, and I found it a better place to eat than the grandest dining room in the world. It was so cozy and homelike and warm. It was so handy for the food, too. You took it right off the fire, hot, and put it on the table and ate it. And you could watch your toast toasting at the fender and see it didn't burn while you drank your soup. And if you had forgotten to put salt on the table, you didn't have to get up and go into another room to fetch it. You just reached round and took the big wooden box off the dresser behind you. Then the fireplace, the biggest fireplace you ever saw, was like a room in itself. You could get right inside it, even when the logs were burning, and sit on the wide seats either side, and roast chestnuts after the meal was over, or listen to the kettle singing, or tell stories, or look at picture books by the light of the fire. It was a marvelous kitchen. It was like the doctor, comfortable, sensible, friendly, and solid. While we were gobbling away, the door suddenly opened, and in marched the duck Dab-Dab, and the dog Jip, dragging sheets and pillowcases behind them over the clean tiled floor. The doctor, seeing how surprised I was, explained. They're just going to air the bedding for me in front of the fire. Dab-Dab is a perfect treasure of a housekeeper. She never forgets anything. I had a sister once who used to keep house for me. Poor dear Sarah. I wonder how she's getting on. I haven't seen her in many years. But she wasn't nearly as good as Dab-Dab. Have another sausage? The doctor turned and said a few words to the dog and duck in some strange talk and signs. They seemed to understand him perfectly. Can you talk in squirrel language? I asked. Oh, yes, that's quite an easy language, said the doctor. You could learn that yourself without a great deal of trouble. Why do you ask? Because I have a sick squirrel at home, I said. I took it away from a hawk, but 2 of its legs are badly hurt, and I wanted very much to have you see it, if you would. Shall I bring it tomorrow? Well, if its leg is badly broken, I think I had better see it tonight. It may be too late to do much, but I'll come home with you and take a look at it. So presently we felt the clothes by the fire, and mine were found to be quite dry. I took them upstairs to the bedroom and changed, and when I came down, the doctor was already waiting for me with his little black bag full of medicines and bandages. Come along, he said. The rain has stopped now. Outside it had grown bright again, and the evening sky was all red with the setting sun, and thrushes were singing in the garden as we opened the gate to go down onto the road. End of Part 1, Chapter 4.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting, Part 1, Chapter 5, Polynesia. "I think your house is the most interesting house I was ever in," I said, as we set off in the direction of the town. "May I come and see you again tomorrow?" "Certainly," said the doctor. "Come any day you like. Tomorrow I'll show you the garden and my private zoo." "Oh, have you a zoo?" I asked. "Yes," said he. "The larger animals are too big for the house, so I keep them in a zoo in the garden. It is not a very big collection, but it is interesting in its way." "It must be splendid," I said, "to be able to talk all the languages of the different animals. Do you think I could ever learn to do it?" "Oh, surely," said the doctor, "with practice. You have to be very patient, you know. You really ought to have Polynesia to start you. It was she who gave me my very first lessons." "Who is Polynesia?" I asked. "Polynesia was a West African parrot I had. She isn't with me any more now," said the doctor sadly. "Why, is she dead?" "Oh, no," said the doctor. "She is still living, I hope. But when we reached Africa, she seemed so glad to get back to her own country, she wept for joy. And when the time came for me to come back here, I had not the heart to take her away from that sunny land, although it is true she did offer to come. I left her in Africa. Ah, well, I have missed her terribly. She wept again when we left. But I think I did the right thing. She was one of the best friends I ever had. It was she who first gave me the idea of learning the animal languages and becoming an animal doctor. I often wonder if she remained happy in Africa, and whether I shall ever see her funny, old, solemn face again. Good old Polynesia, a most extraordinary bird. Well, well." Just at that moment we heard the noise of someone running behind us, and turning round we saw Jip the dog rushing down this road after us as fast as his legs could bring him. He seemed very excited about something, and as soon as he came up to us, he started barking and whining to the doctor in a peculiar way. Then the doctor, too, seemed to get all worked up and began talking and making queer signs to the dog. At length he turned to me, his face shining with happiness. "Polynesia has come back," he cried. "Imagine it! Jip says she has just arrived at the house. My, and it's 5 years since I saw her. Excuse me a minute." He turned as if to go back home, but the parrot, Polynesia, was already flying towards us. The doctor clapped his hands like a child getting a new toy, while the swarm of sparrows in the roadway fluttered, gossiping, up onto the fences, highly scandalized to see a gray and scarlet parrot skimming down an English lane. On she came, straight on to the doctor's shoulder, where she immediately began talking a steady stream in a language I could not understand. She seemed to have a terrible lot to say, and very soon the doctor had forgotten all about me and my squirrel, and Jip and everything else, till at length the bird clearly asked him something about me. "Oh, excuse me, Stubbins," said the doctor. "I was so interested listening to my old friend here. We must get on and see this squirrel of yours. Polynesia, this is Thomas Stubbins." The parrot on the doctor's shoulder nodded gravely towards me, and then, to my great surprise, said quite plainly in English, "How do you do? I remember the night you were born. It was a terribly cold winter. You were a very ugly baby." "Stubbins is anxious to learn animal language," said the doctor. "I was just telling him about you and the lessons you gave me when Jip ran up and told us you had arrived." "Well," said the parrot, turning to me, "I may have started the doctor learning, but I never could have done even that if he hadn't first taught me to understand what I was saying when I spoke English. You see, many parrots can talk like a person, but very few of them understand what they are saying. They just say it because, well, because they fancy it is smart, or because they know they will get crackers given them. By this time we had turned and were going towards my home, with Jip running in front and Polynesia still perched on the doctor's shoulder. The bird chattered incessantly, mostly about Africa, but now she spoke in English, out of politeness to me. "How is Prince Bumpo getting on?" asked the doctor. "Oh, I'm glad you asked me," said Polynesia. "I almost forgot to tell you." "What do you think? Bumpo is in England." "In England? You don't say!" cried the doctor. "What on earth is he doing here?" "His father, the king, sent him here to a place called, Bulford. I think it was to study lessons." "Bulford? Bulford?" muttered the doctor. "I never heard of the place." "Oh, you mean Oxford." "Yes, that's the place, Oxford," said Polynesia. "I knew it had cattle in it somewhere. Oxford, that's the place he's gone to." "Well, well," murmured the doctor. "Fancy Bumpo studying at Oxford. Well, well." There were great doings in Jolliginki when he left. He was scared to death to come. He was the first man from that country to go abroad. He thought he was going to be eaten by white cannibals or something. You know what those niggers are, that ignorant. Well, but his father made him come. He said that all the black kings were sending their sons to Oxford now. It was the fashion, and he would have to go. Bumpo wanted to bring his 6 wives with him, but the king wouldn't let him do that either. Poor Bumpo went off in tears, and everybody in the palace was crying too. You never heard such a hullabaloo. "Do you know if he ever went back in search of the Sleeping Beauty?" asked the doctor. "Oh, yes," said Polynesia, "the day after you left, and a good thing for him he did. The king got to know about his helping you to escape, and he was dreadfully wild about it." "And the Sleeping Beauty, did he ever find her?" "Well, he brought back something which he said was the Sleeping Beauty. Myself, I think it was an albino negress. She had red hair and the biggest feet you ever saw. But Bumpo was no end pleased with her, and finally married her amid great rejoicings. The feastings lasted 7 days. She became his chief wife, and is now known out there as the Crown Princess Bumpa. You accent the last syllable. "And tell me, did he remain white?" "Only for about 3 months," said the parrot, "and after that his face slowly returned to its natural color. It was just as well. He was so conspicuous in his bathing suit the way he was, with his white face and the rest of him black." "And how is Chi-Chi getting on?" "Chi-Chi," added the doctor in explanation to me, "was a pet monkey I had years ago. I left him, too, in Africa when I came away." "Well," said Polynesia, frowning, "Chi-Chi is not entirely happy. I saw a good deal of him the last few years. He got dreadfully homesick for you and the house and the garden. It's funny, but I was just the same way myself. You remember how crazy I was to get back to the dear old land? And Africa is a wonderful country. I don't care what anybody says. Well, I thought I was going to have a perfectly grand time. But somehow, I don't know, after a few weeks it seemed to get tiresome. I just couldn't seem to settle down. Well, to make a long story short, one night I made up my mind that I'd come back here and find you. So I hunted up old Chi-Chi and told him about it. He said he didn't blame me a bit. Felt exactly the same way himself. Africa was so deadly quiet after the life we had led with you. He missed the stories you used to tell us out of your animal books, and the chats we used to have sitting around the kitchen fire on winter nights. The animals out there were very nice to us and all that, but somehow the dear kind creatures seemed a bit stupid. Chi-Chi said he had noticed it too. But I suppose it wasn't they who had changed. It was we who were different. When I left, poor old Chi-Chi broke down and cried. He said he felt as though his only friend were leaving him, though, as you know, He has simply millions of relatives there. He said it didn't seem fair that I should have wings to fly over here any time I liked, and him with no way to follow me. But mark my words, I wouldn't be a bit surprised if he found a way to come, some day. He's a smart lad, is Chee-Chee. At this point we arrived at my home. My father's shop was closed, and the shutters were up, but my mother was standing at the door looking down the street. "Good evening, Mrs. Stubbins," said the doctor. "It is my fault your son is so late. I made him stay to supper while his clothes were drying. He was soaked to the skin, and so was I. We ran into one another in the storm, and I insisted on his coming into my house for shelter." "I was beginning to get worried about him," said my mother. "I am thankful to you, sir, for looking after him so well and bringing him home." "Don't mention it, said the doctor. "We have had a very interesting chat." "Who might it be that I have the honor of addressing?" asked my mother, staring at the gray parrot perched on the doctor's shoulders. "Oh, I'm John Dolittle. I dare say your husband will remember me. He made me some very excellent boots about 4 years ago." "They really are splendid," added the doctor, gazing down at his feet with great satisfaction. "The doctor has come to cure my squirrel, mother," said I. "He knows all about animals." "Oh, no," said the doctor. "Not all, Stubbins. Not all about them by any means." "It is very kind of you to come so far to look after his pet," said my mother. "Tom is always bringing home strange creatures from the woods and the fields." "Is he?" said the doctor. "Perhaps he will grow up to be a naturalist some day. Who knows?" "Won't you come in?" asked my mother. "The place is a little untidy because I haven't finished the spring cleaning yet, but there's a nice fire burning in the parlor." "Thank you," said the doctor. "What a charming home you have." And after wiping his enormous boots very, very carefully on the mat, the great man passed into the house. End of Chapter 5.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read and recorded by Betsy Bush. Marquette, Michigan, December 2006. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting. Part 1, Chapter 6. The Wounded Squirrel. Inside, we found my father busy practicing on the flute beside the fire. This he always did every evening after his work was over. The doctor immediately began talking to him about flutes and piccolos and bassoons, and presently my father said, "Perhaps you perform upon the flute yourself, sir. Won't you play us a tune?" "Well," said the doctor, "it is a long time since I touched the instrument, but I would like to try. May I?" Then the doctor took the flute from my father and played and played and played. It was wonderful. My mother and father sat as still as statues, staring up at the ceiling as though they were in church. And even I, who didn't bother much about music except on the mouth organ, even I felt all sad and cold and creepy, and wished I had been a better boy. "Oh, I think that was just beautiful," sighed my mother, when at length the doctor stopped. "You are a great musician, sir," said my father. "A very great musician. Won't you please play us something else?" "Why, certainly," said the doctor. "Oh, but look here, I've forgotten all about the squirrel." "I'll show him to you," I said. "He is upstairs in my room." So I led the doctor to my bedroom at the top of the house, and showed him the squirrel in the packing-case filled with straw. The animal, who had always seemed very much afraid of me, though I had tried hard to make him feel at home, sat up at once when the doctor came into the room and started to chatter. The doctor chattered back in the same way, and the squirrel, when he was lifted up to have his leg examined, appeared to be rather pleased than frightened. I held a candle while the doctor tied the leg up in what he called splints, which he made out of matchsticks with his penknife. "I think you will find that his leg will get better now in a very short time," said the doctor, closing up his bag. "Don't let him run about for at least 2 weeks yet, but keep him in the open air and cover him up with dry leaves if the nights get cool. He tells me he is rather lonely here all by himself, and is wondering how his wife and children are getting on. I have assured him you are a man to be trusted, and I will send a squirrel who lives in my garden to find out how his family are and to bring him news of them. He must be kept cheerful at all costs. Squirrels are naturally a very cheerful, active race. It is very hard for them to lie still doing nothing. But you needn't worry about him. He will be all right." Then we went back again to the parlor, and my mother and father kept him playing the flute until after 10 o'clock. Although my parents both liked the doctor tremendously from the first moment that they saw him, and were very proud to have him come and play to us, for we were really terribly poor, they did not realize then what a truly great man he was one day to become. Of course now, when almost everybody in the whole world has heard about Dr. Dolittle and his books, if you were to go to that little house in Puddleby where my father had his cobbler's shop, you would see, set in the wall, over the old-fashioned door, a stone with the writing on it which says, "John Dolittle, the famous naturalist, played the flute in this house in the year 1839. I often look back upon that night long ago, and if I close my eyes and think hard, I can see that parlor just as it was then. A funny little man in coat-tails, with a round, kind face, playing away on the flute in front of the fire. My mother on one side of him, and my father on the other, holding their breath and listening with their eyes shut. Myself with Jip, squatting on the carpet at his feet, staring into the coals, and Polynesia perched on the mantelpiece beside his shabby high hat, gravely swinging her head from side to side in time to the music. I see it all, just as though it were before me now. And then I remember how, after we had seen the doctor out at the front door, we all came back into the parlor and talked about him till it was still later. And even after I did go to bed, I had never stayed up so late in my life before, I dreamed about him and a band of strange, clever animals that played flutes and fiddles and drums the whole night through. End of Part 1, Chapter 6. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read and recorded by Betsy Bush, Marquette, Michigan, December 2006. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting, Part 1, Chapter 7. Shellfish Talk. The next morning, although I had gone to bed so late the night before, I was up frightfully early. The first sparrows were just beginning to chirp sleepily on the slates outside my attic window when I jumped out of bed and scrambled into my clothes. I could hardly wait to get back to the little house with the big garden to see the doctor and his private zoo. For the first time in my life I forgot all about breakfast, and creeping down the stairs on tiptoe so as not to wake my mother and father, I opened the front door and popped out into the empty, silent street. When I got to the doctor's gate, I suddenly thought that perhaps it was too early to call on anyone, and I began to wonder if the doctor would be up yet. I looked into the garden. No one seemed to be about, so I opened the gate quietly and went inside. As I turned to the left to go down a path between some hedges, I heard a voice quite close to me say, "Good morning. How early you are!" I turned around, and there, sitting on the top of a privet hedge, was the gray parrot Polynesia. "Good morning," I said. "I suppose I am rather early. Is the doctor still in bed?" "Oh, no," said Polynesia. "He has been up an hour and a half. You'll find him in the house somewhere. The front door's open. Just push it in and go in. He is sure to be in the kitchen cooking breakfast, or working in his study. Walk right in. I am waiting to see the sun rise. But upon my word, I believe it's forgotten to rise. It is an awful climate, this. Now, if we were in Africa, the world would be blazing with sunlight at this hour of the morning. Just see that mist rolling over those cabbages. It is enough to give the rheumatism to look at it. Beastly climate, beastly. Really, I don't know why anything but frogs ever stay in England. Well, don't let me keep you. Run along and see the doctor." "Thank you," I said. "I'll go and look for him." When I opened the front door, I could smell bacon frying, so I made my way to the kitchen. There I discovered a large kettle boiling away over the fire and some bacon and eggs in a dish upon the hearth. It seemed to me that the bacon was getting all dried up with the heat, so I pulled the dish a little further away from the fire and went on through the house looking for the doctor. I found him at last in the study. I did not know then that it was called the study. It was certainly a very interesting room, with telescopes and microscopes and all sorts of other strange things which I did not understand about, but wished I did. Hanging on the walls were pictures of animals and fishes and strange plants, and collections of birds' eggs and seashells in glass cases. The doctor was standing at the main table in his dressing gown. At first I thought he was washing his face. He had a square glass box before him full of water. He was holding one ear under the water while he covered the other with his left hand. As I came in, he stood up. "Good morning, Stubbins," said he. "Going to be a nice day, don't you think? I've just been listening to the whiff-waff, but he is very disappointing, very." "Why?" I said. "Didn't you find that he has any language at all?" "Oh, yes," said the doctor. "He has a language, but it is such a poor language, only a few words like yes and no, hot and cold. That's all he can say. It's very disappointing. You see, he really belongs to 2 different families of fishes. I thought he was going to be tremendously helpful. Well, well." "I suppose," said I, "that means he hasn't very much sense if his language is only 2 or 3 words." "Yes, I suppose it does. Possibly it is the kind of life he leads. You see, they are very rare now, these whiff-waffs. Very rare and very solitary. They swim around in the deepest parts of the ocean entirely by themselves, always alone. So I presume they really don't need to talk much." "Perhaps some kind of a bigger shellfish would talk more," I said. "After all, he is very small, isn't he?" "Yes," said the doctor, "that's true. Oh, I have no doubt that there are shellfish who are good talkers, not the least doubt. But the big shellfish, the biggest of them, are so hard to catch. They are only to be found in the deep parts of the sea, and as they don't swim very much, but just crawl along the floor of the ocean most of the time, they are very seldom taken in nets. I do wish I could find some way of going down to the bottom of the sea. I could learn a lot if I could only do that. But we are forgetting all about breakfast. Have you had breakfast yet, Stubbins?" I told the doctor that I had forgotten all about it, and he at once led the way into the kitchen. "Yes," he said, as he poured the hot water from the kettle into the teapot. "If a man could only manage to get right down to the bottom of the sea and live there a while, he would discover some wonderful things, things that people have never dreamed of." "But men do go down, don't they?" I asked. "Divers and people like that?" "Oh, yes, to be sure," said the doctor. "Divers go down. I've been down myself in a diving suit, for that matter. But my, they only go where the sea is shallow. Divers can't go down where it is really deep. What I would like to do is to go down to the great depths, where it is miles deep. Well, well, I dare say I shall manage it some day. Let me give you another cup of tea." End of Part 1, Chapter 7.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Lucy Burgoyne. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting. Part 1, Chapter 8. Are you a good noticer? Just at that moment Polynesia came into the room and said something to the doctor in bird language. Of course I did not understand what it was, but the doctor at once put down his knife and fork and left the room. "You know it is an awful shame," said the parrot as soon as the doctor had closed the door. "Directly he comes back home, all the animals over the whole countryside get to hear of it, and every sick cat and mangy rabbit for miles around comes to see him and ask his advice. Now there's a big fat hare outside at the back door with a squawking baby. Can she see the doctor, please? Thinks it's going to have convulsions. Stupid little thing's been eating deadly nightshade again, I suppose. The animals are so inconsiderate at times, especially the mothers. They come round and call the doctor away from his meals and wake him out of his bed at all hours of the night. I don't know how he stands it, really I don't. Why, the poor man never gets any peace at all. I've told him time and again to have special hours for the animals to come. But he is so frightfully kind and considerate. He never refuses to see them if there is anything really wrong with them. He says the urgent cases must be seen at once." "Why don't some of the animals go and see the other doctors?" I asked. "Oh, good gracious!" exclaimed the parrot, tossing her head scornfully. "Why, there aren't any other animal doctors, not real doctors. Oh, of course there are those vet persons, to be sure. But, bless you, they're no good. You see, they can't understand the animals' language, so how can you expect them to be any use? Imagine yourself, or your father, going to see a doctor who could not understand a word you say, nor even tell you in your own language what you must do to get well. Poof, those vets! They're that stupid, you've no idea. Put the doctor's bacon down by the fire, will you, to keep hot till he comes back." "Do you think I would ever be able to learn the language of the animals?" I asked, laying the plate upon the hearth. "Well, it all depends," said Polynesia. "Are you clever at lessons?" "I don't know," I answered, feeling rather ashamed. "You see, I've never been to school. My father is too poor to send me." "Well," said the parrot, "I don't suppose you have really missed much, to judge from what I have seen of schoolboys. But listen. Are you a good noticer? Do you notice things well? I mean, for instance, supposing you saw two cock starlings on an apple tree, and you only took one good look at them, would you be able to tell one from the other if you saw them again the next day?" "I don't know," I said. "I've never tried." "Well, that," said Polynesia, brushing some crumbs off the corner of the table with her left foot, "that is what you call powers of observation, noticing the small things about birds and animals, the way they walk and move their heads and flip their wings, the way they sniff the air and twitch their whiskers and wiggle their tails. You have to notice all those little things if you want to learn animal language. For you see, lots of the animals hardly talk at all with their tongues. They use their breath or their tails or their feet instead. That is because many of them, in the olden days when lions and tigers were more plentiful, were afraid to make a noise for fear the savage creatures heard them. Birds, of course, didn't care, for they always had wings to fly away with. But that is the first thing to remember. Being a good noticer is terribly important in learning animal language." "It sounds pretty hard," I said. "You'll have to be very patient," said Polynesia. It takes a long time to say even a few words properly. But if you come here often, I'll give you a few lessons myself. And once you get started, you'll be surprised how fast you get on. It would indeed be a good thing if you could learn, because then you could do some of the work for the doctor. I mean the easier work, like bandaging and giving pills. Yes, that's a good idea of mine. 'Twould be a great thing if the poor man could get some help and some rest. It is a scandal the way he works. I see no reason why you shouldn't be able to help him a great deal. That is, if you are really interested in animals." "Oh, I'd love that," I cried. "Do you think the doctor would let me?" "Certainly," said Polynesia. "As soon as you have learned something about doctoring. I'll speak of it to him myself. Shh! I hear him coming. Quick, bring his bacon back onto the table." End of chapter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Lucy Burgoyne. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting. Part 1, Chapter 9. The Garden of Dreams. When breakfast was over, the doctor took me out to show me the garden. Well, if the house had been interesting, the garden was 100 times more so. Of all the gardens I have ever seen, that was the most delightful, the most fascinating. At first you did not realize how big it was. You never seemed to come to the end of it. When at last you were quite sure that you had seen it all, you would peer over a hedge, or turn a corner, or look up some steps, and there was a whole new part you never expected to find. It had everything a garden can have, or ever has had. There were wide lawns with carved stone seats, green with moss. Over the lawns hung weeping willows, and their feathery bough tips brushed the velvet grass when they swung with the wind. The old flag paths had high, clipped yew hedges either side of them, so that they looked like the narrow streets of some old town. And through the hedges doorways had been made, and over the doorways were shapes like vases and peacocks and half-moons, all trimmed out of the living trees. There was a lovely marble fish pond with golden carp and blue water lilies in it, and big green frogs. A high brick wall alongside the kitchen garden was all covered with pink and yellow peaches ripening in the sun. There was a wonderful great oak, hollow in the trunk, big enough for 4 men to hide inside. Many summer houses there were, too, some of wood and some of stone, and one of them was full of books to read. In a corner, among some rocks and ferns, was an outdoor fireplace where the doctor used to fry liver and bacon when he had a notion to take his meals in the open air. There was a couch as well on which he used to sleep. It seems, on warm summer nights when the nightingales were singing at their best, it had wheels on it so it could be moved about under any tree they sang in. But the thing that fascinated me most of all was a tiny little tree house, high up in the top branches of a great elm, with a long rope ladder leading to it. The doctor told me he used it for looking at the moon and the stars through a telescope. It was the kind of garden where you could wander and explore for days and days, always coming upon something new, always glad to find the old spots over again. That first time that I saw the doctor's garden, I was so charmed by it that I felt I would like to live in it, always, and never go outside of it again, for it had everything within its walls to give happiness, to make living pleasant, to keep the heart at peace. It was the Garden of Dreams. One peculiar thing I noticed immediately I came into it, and that was what a lot of birds there were about. Every tree seemed to have 2 or 3 nests in it, and heaps of other wild creatures appeared to be making themselves at home there, too. Stoats and tortoises and dormice seemed to be quite common, and not in the least shy. Toads of different colours and sizes hopped about the lawn as though it belonged to them. Green lizards, which were very rare in Puddleby, sat up on the stones in the sunlight and blinked at us. Even snakes were to be seen. "You need not be afraid of them," said the doctor, noticing that I started somewhat when a large black snake wiggled across the path right in front of us. "These fellows are not poisonous. They do a great deal of good in keeping down many kinds of garden pests. I play the flute to them sometimes in the evening. They love it. Stand right up on their tails and carry on no end. Funny thing, their taste for music." "Why do all these animals come and live here?" I asked. "I never saw a garden with so many creatures in it." "Well, I suppose it's because they get the kind of food they like, and nobody worries or disturbs them. And then, of course, they know me, and if they or their children get sick, I presume they find it handy to be living in a doctor's garden. Look, you see that sparrow on the sundial, swearing at the blackbird down below? Well, he has been coming here every summer for years. He comes from London. The country sparrows round about here are always laughing at him. They say he chirps with such a Cockney accent. He is a most amusing bird, very brave but very cheeky. He loves nothing better than an argument, but he always ends it by getting rude. He is a real city bird. In London he lives around St. Paul's Cathedral. Cheapside, we call him." "Are all these birds from the country round here?" I asked. "Most of them," said the doctor, "but a few rare ones visit me every year who ordinarily never come near England at all. For instance, that handsome little fellow hovering over the snapdragon there. He's a ruby-throated hummingbird, comes from America. Strictly speaking, he has no business in this climate at all. It is too cool. I make him sleep in the kitchen at night. Then every August, about the last week of the month, I have a purple bird of paradise come all the way from Brazil to see me. She is a very great swell. Hasn't arrived yet, of course. And there are a few others, foreign birds from the tropics mostly, who drop in on me in the course of the summer months. But come, I must show you the zoo." End of chapter.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Farida de Lang. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting, Part 1, Chapter 10, The Private Zoo. I did not think there could be anything left in that garden which we had not seen, but the doctor took me by the arm and started off down a little narrow path, and after many windings and twistings and turnings, we found ourselves before a small door in a high stone wall. The doctor pushed it open. Inside was still another garden. I had expected to find cages with animals inside them, but there were none to be seen. Instead, there were little stone houses here and there all over the garden, and each house had a window and a door. As we walked in, many of these doors opened, and animals came running out to us, evidently expecting food. "Haven't the doors any locks on them?" I asked the doctor. "Oh, yes," he said. "Every door has a lock, but in my zoo the doors open from the inside, not from the out. The locks are only there so the animals can go and shut themselves in any time they want to get away from the annoyance of other animals or from people who might come here. Every animal in this zoo stays here because he likes it, not because he is made to." "They all look very happy and clean," I said. "Would you mind telling me the names of some of them?" "Certainly. Well now, that funny-looking thing with plates on his back, nosing under the brick over there, is a South American armadillo. The little chap talking to him is a Canadian woodchuck. They both live in those holes you see at the foot of the wall. The two little beasts doing antics in the pond are a pair of Russian minks, and that reminds me I must go and get them some herrings from the town before noon. It is early closing today. That animal just stepping out of his house is an antelope, one of the smaller South African kinds. Now let us move to the other side of those bushes, and there I will show you some more. Are those deer over there? I asked. Deer? Said the doctor. Where do you mean? Over there, I said, pointing. Nibbling the grass border of the bed. There are two of them. Oh, that, said the doctor with a smile. That isn't two animals. That is one animal with two heads. The only two-headed animal in the world. It's called the push-me-pull-you. I brought him from Africa. He's very tame. Acts as a kind of night watch for my zoo. He only sleeps with one head at a time. You see, very handy. The other head stays awake all night. Have you any lions or tigers? I asked as we moved on. No, said the doctor. It wouldn't be possible to keep them here, and I wouldn't keep them even if I could. If I had my way, Stubbins, there wouldn't be a single lion or tiger in captivity anywhere in the world. They never take to it. They're never happy. They never settle down. They are always thinking of the big countries they have left behind. You can see it in their eyes, dreaming always of the great open spaces where they were born, dreaming of the deep dark jungles where their mothers first taught them how to scent and track the deer. And what are they given in exchange for all this? Asked the doctor, stopping in his walk and growing all red and angry. What are they given in exchange for the glory of an African sunrise, for the twilight breeze whispering through the palms, for the green shade of the matted tangled vines, for the cool big-starred nights in the deserts, for the patter of the waterfall after a hard day's hunt? What, I ask you, are they given in exchange for these? Why, a bare cage with iron bars, an ugly piece of dead meat thrust to them once a day, and a crowd of fools to come and stare at them with open mouths. No, Stubbins. Lions and tigers, the big hunters, should never be seen in zoos. The doctor seemed to have grown terribly serious, almost sad, but suddenly his manner changed again, and he took me by the arm with his same old cheerful smile. But we haven't seen the butterfly houses yet, nor the aquariums. Come along. I'm very proud of my butterfly houses. Off we went again, and came presently into a hedged enclosure. Here I saw several big huts made of fine wire netting, like cages. Inside the netting all sorts of beautiful flowers were growing in the sun, with butterflies skimming over them. The doctor pointed to the end of one of the huts, where little boxes with holes in them stood in a row. Those are the hatching boxes, said he. There I put the different kinds of caterpillars, and as soon as they turn into butterflies and moths, they come out into these flower gardens to feed. Do butterflies have a language? I asked. Oh, I fancy they have, said the doctor, and the beetles too. But so far I haven't succeeded in learning much about insect languages. I have been too busy lately trying to master the shellfish talk. I mean to take it up, though. At that moment Polynesia joined us and said, Doctor, there are 2 guinea pigs at the back door. They say they have run away from the boy who kept them because they didn't get the right stuff to eat. They want to know if you will take them in. All right, said the doctor. Show them the way to the zoo. Give them the house on the left, near the gate, the one the black fox had. Tell them what the rules are, and give them a square meal. Now, Stubbins, we will go on to the aquariums, and first of all I must show you a big glass seawater tank where I keep the shellfish. End of chapter 10, recorded by Verida de Lang. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Verida de Lang. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting, Part 1, Chapter 11, My Schoolmaster Polynesia. Well, there were not many days after that, you may be sure, when I did not come to see my new friend. Indeed, I was at his house practically all day and every day, so that one evening my mother asked me jokingly why I did not take my bed over there and live at the doctor's house altogether. After a while I think I got to be quite useful to the doctor, feeding his pets for him, helping to make new houses and fences for the zoo, assisting with the sick animals that came, doing all manner of odd jobs about the place, so that although I enjoyed it all very much, it was indeed like living in a new world. I really think the doctor would have missed me if I had not come so often. And all this time Polynesia came with me wherever I went, teaching me bird language and showing me how to understand the talking signs of the animals. At first I thought I would never be able to learn at all. It seemed so difficult. But the old parrot was wonderfully patient with me, though I could see that occasionally she had hard work to keep her temper. Soon I began to pick up the strange chatter of the birds and to understand the funny talking antics of the dogs. I used to practice listening to the mice behind the wainscot after I went to bed, and watching the cats on the roof and pigeons in the market square of Puddleby. And the days passed by very quickly, as they always do when life is pleasant, and the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and soon the roses in the doctor's garden were losing their petals, and yellow leaves lay upon the white-green lawn, for the summer was nearly gone. One day Polynesia and I were talking in the library. This was a fine long room with a grand mantelpiece, and the walls were covered from the ceiling to the floor with shelves full of books. Books of stories, books on gardening, books about medicine, books of travel. These I loved, and especially the doctor's great atlas, with all its maps of different countries of the world. This afternoon Polynesia was showing me the books about animals which John Dolittle had written himself. "My," I said, "what a lot of books the doctor has! All the way around the room! Goodness! I wish I could read! It must be tremendously interesting. Can you read, Polynesia?" "Only a little," said she. "Be careful how you turn those pages. Don't tear them." "No, I really don't get time enough for reading much. That letter there is a K, and this is a B. What does this word under the picture mean?" I asked. "Let me see," she said, and started spelling it out. B-A-B-O-O-N. That's monkey. Reading isn't nearly as hard as it looks, once you know the letters. "Polynesia," I said, "I want to ask you something very important." "What is it, my boy?" said she, smoothing down the feathers of her white wing. Polynesia often spoke to me in a very patronizing way, but I did not mind it from her. After all, she was nearly 200 years old, and I was only 10. "Listen," I said, "my mother doesn't think it is right that I come here for so many meals, and I was going to ask you, supposing I did a whole lot more work for the doctor, why couldn't I come and live here altogether? You see, instead of being paid like a regular gardener or workman, I would get my bed and meals in exchange for the work I did. What do you think?" "You mean you want to be a proper assistant to the doctor? Is that it?" "Yes, I suppose that's what you can call it," I answered. "You know, you said yourself that you thought I could be very useful to him." "Well," she thought for a moment, "I really don't see why not. But is this what you want to be when you grow up? A naturalist?" "Yes," I said, "I have made up my mind. I would sooner be a naturalist than anything else in the world." "Let's go and speak to the doctor about it," said Polynesia. "He's in the next room, in the study. Open the door very gently. He may be working and not want to be disturbed." I opened the door quietly and peeped in. The first thing I saw was an enormous black retriever dog, sitting in the middle of the hearth rug with his ears cocked up, listening to the doctor, who was reading aloud to him from a letter. "What is the doctor doing?" I asked Polynesia in a whisper. "Oh, the dog has had a letter from his mistress, and he has brought it to the doctor to read for him. That's all. He belongs to a funny little girl called Minnie Dooley, who lives on the other side of the town. She has pigtails down her back. She and her brother have gone away to the seaside for the summer, and the old retriever is heartbroken while the children are gone. So they write letters to him, in English of course, and as the old dog doesn't understand them, he brings them here, and the doctor turns them into dog language for him. I think Minnie must have written that she is coming back, to judge from the dog's excitement. Just look at him carrying on. Indeed, the retriever seemed to be suddenly overcome with joy. As the doctor finished the letter, the old dog started barking at the top of his voice, wagging his tail wildly and jumping about the study. He took the letter in his mouth and ran out of the room, snorting hard and mumbling to himself. "He's going down to meet the coach," whispered Polynesia. "That dog's devotion to those children is more than I can understand. You should see Minnie. She's the most conceited little minx that ever walked. She squints too." End of chapter 11. Recorded by Farida de Lang.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Stefan Schmelz. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting. Part 1, Chapter 12. My Great Idea. Presently the doctor looked up and saw us at the door. "Oh, come in, Stubbins," said he. "Did you wish to speak to me? Come in and take a chair." "Doctor," I said, "I want to be a naturalist like you when I grow up." "Oh, you do you?" murmured the doctor. Well, dear me, you don't say. Well, have you spoken to your mother and father about it?" "No, not yet," I said. "I want you to speak to them for me. You would do it better. I want to be your helper, your assistant, if you'll have me. Last night my mother was saying that she didn't consider it right for me to come here so often for meals, and I've been thinking about it a good deal since. Couldn't we make some arrangements? Couldn't I work for my meals and sleep here?" "But, my dear Stubbins," said the doctor, laughing, "you are quite welcome to come here for 3 meals a day all the year round. I'm only too glad to have you. Besides, you do a lot of work as it is. I've often felt that I ought to pay you for what you do. But what arrangement was it that you thought of?" "Well, I thought," said I, "that perhaps you would come and see my mother and father and tell them that if they let me live here with you and work hard, that you will teach me to read and write. You see, my mother is awfully anxious to have me learn reading and writing. And besides, I couldn't be a proper naturalist without, could I?" "Oh, I don't know so much about that," said the doctor. "It is nice, I admit, to be able to read and write. But naturalists are not all alike, you know. For example, this young fellow Charles Darwin that people are talking about so much now. He's a Cambridge graduate, reads and writes very well. And then Cuvier. He used to be a tutor. But listen, the greatest naturalist of them all doesn't even know how to write his own name, nor to read the ABC." "Who is he?" I asked. "He is a mysterious person," said the doctor. "A very mysterious person. His name is Long Arrow, the son of Golden Arrow. He's a Red Indian." "Have you ever seen him?" I asked. "No," said the doctor. "I've never seen him. No white man has ever met him. I fancy Mr. Darwin doesn't even know that he exists. He lives almost entirely with the animals and with the different tribes of Indians, usually somewhere among the mountains of Peru. Never stays long in one place, goes from tribe to tribe like a sort of Indian tramp." "How do you know so much about him?" I asked, "if you've never even seen him?" "The purple bird of paradise," said the doctor. "She told me all about him. She says he is a perfectly marvelous naturalist. I got her to take a message to him for me last time she was here. I'm expecting her back any day now. I can hardly wait to see what answer she has brought from him. It is already almost the last week of August. I do hope nothing has happened to her on the way." "But why do the animals and birds come to you when they are sick?" I said. "Why don't they go to him, if he is so very wonderful?" "It seems that my methods are more up to date," said the doctor. "But from what the purple bird of paradise tells me, Long Arrow's knowledge of natural history must be positively tremendous. His specialty is botany, plants and all that sort of thing. But he knows a lot about birds and animals too. He's very good on bees and beetles. But now tell me, Stubbins, are you quite sure that you really want to be a naturalist?" "Yes," said I. "My mind is made up." "Well, you know, it isn't a very good profession for making money. Not at all, it isn't. Most of the good naturalists don't make any money whatever. All they do is spend money, buying butterfly nets and cases for birds' eggs and things. It is only now, after I have been a naturalist for many years, that I am beginning to make a little money from the books I write." "I don't care about money," I said. "I want to be a naturalist. Won't you please come and have dinner with my mother and father next Thursday? I told them I was going to ask you, and then you can talk to them about it. You see, there's another thing. If I'm living with you and sort of belong to your house and business, I shall be able to come with you next time you go on a voyage." "Oh, I see," said he, smiling. "So you want to come on a voyage with me, do you? Aha!" "I want to go on all your voyages with you. It would be much easier for you if you had someone to carry the butterfly nets and notebooks, wouldn't it now?" For a long time the doctor sat thinking, drumming on the desk with his fingers, while I waited terribly impatiently to see what he was going to say. At last he shrugged his shoulders and stood up. "Well, Stubbins," said he, "I'll come and talk it over with you and your parents next Thursday. And, well, we'll see. Give your mother and father my compliments and thank them for their invitation, will you?" Then I tore home like the wind to tell my mother that the doctor has promised to come. End of chapter 12. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Stefan Schmelz. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting. Part 1, Chapter 13. A Traveler Arrives. The next day I was sitting on the wall of the doctor's garden after tea, talking to Dub. I had now learned so much from Polynesia that I could talk to most birds and some animals without a great deal of difficulty. I found Dub a very nice, old, motherly bird, though not nearly so clever and interesting as Polynesia. She had been housekeeper for the doctor many years now. Well, as I was saying, the old duck and I were sitting on the flat top of the garden wall that evening, looking down into the Oxenthorpe Road below. We were watching some sheep being driven to market in Puddleby, and Dub had just been telling me about the doctor's adventures in Africa, for she had gone on a voyage with him to that country long ago. Suddenly I heard a curious distant noise down the road towards the town. It sounded like a lot of people cheering. I stood up on the wall to see if I could make out what was coming. Presently there appeared round a bend a great crowd of school children, following a very ragged, curious-looking woman.
"What in the world can it be?"
cried Dub. The children were all laughing and shouting, and certainly the woman they were following was most extraordinary. She had very long arms and the most stooping shoulders I have ever seen. She wore a straw hat on the side of her head with poppies on it, and her skirt was so long for her it dragged on the ground like a ball-gown's train. I could not see anything of her face, because of the white hat pulled over her eyes. But as she got nearer to us and the laughing of the children grew louder, I noticed that her hands were very dark in color and hairy, like a witch's. Then, all of a sudden, Dub at my side startled me by crying out in a loud voice,
Why, it's Chi-Chi. Chi-Chi come back at last. How dare those children tease him? I'll give the little imp something to laugh at.
And she flew right off the wall down into the road and made straight for the children, squawking away in the most terrifying fashion and pecking at their feet and legs. The children made off down the street back to the town as hard as they could run. The strange-looking figure in the straw hat stood gazing after them a moment, and then came warily up to the gate. It didn't bother to undo the latch, but climbed right over the gate as though it were something in the way. And then I noticed that it took hold of the bars with its feet, so that it really had 4 hands to climb with. But it was only when I at last got a glimpse of the face under the hat that I could be really sure it was a monkey. Chi-Chi, for it was he, frowned at me suspiciously from the top of the gate as though he thought I was going to laugh at him like the other boys and girls. Then he dropped into the garden on the inside and immediately started taking off his clothes. He tore the straw hat in two and threw it down into the road. Then he took off his bodice and skirt, jumped on them savagely, and began kicking them round the front garden. Presently I heard a screech from the house, and out flew Polynesia, followed by the doctor and Jip.
Chi-Chi, Chi-Chi,
shouted the parrot.
You've come at last. I always told the doctor you'd find a way. However did you do it?
They all gathered round him, shaking him by his 4 hands, laughing and asking him a million questions at once. Then they all started back for the house. "Run up to my bedroom, Stubbins," said the doctor, turning to me. "You'll find a bag of peanuts in the small left-hand drawer of the bureau. I have always kept them there in case he might come back unexpectedly some day. And, wait a minute. See if Dub has any bananas in the pantry. Chi-Chi hasn't had a banana, he tells me, in 2 months. When I came down again to the kitchen, I found everybody listening attentively to the monkey who was telling the story of his journey from Africa. End of chapter 13.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Al Hunt, Alberta, Canada. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting. Part 1, Chapter 14, Chi-Chi's Voyage. It seems that after Polynesia had left, Chi-Chi had grown more homesick than ever for the doctor and the little house in Puddleby. At last he had made up his mind that by hook or crook he would follow her. And one day, going down to the seashore, he saw a lot of people, black and white, getting onto a ship that was coming to England. He tried to get on too, but they turned him back and drove him away. And presently he noticed a whole big family of funny people passing onto the ship, and one of the children in this family reminded Chi-Chi of a cousin of his with whom he had once been in love. So he said to himself, "That girl looks just as much like a monkey as I look like a girl. If I could only get some clothes to wear, I might easily slip onto the ship amongst these families, and people would take me for a girl. Good idea." So he went off to a town that was quite close, and hopping in through an open window, he found a skirt and bodice lying on a chair. They belonged to a fashionable black lady who was taking a bath. Chi-Chi put them on. Next, he went back to the seashore, mingled with the crowd there, and at last sneaked safely onto the big ship. Then he thought he had better hide for fear that people might look at him too closely, and he stayed hidden all the time the ship was sailing to England, only coming out at night when everybody was asleep to find food. When he reached England and tried to get off the ship, the sailors saw at last that he was only a monkey dressed up in girls' clothes, and they wanted to keep him for a pet. But he managed to give them the slip, and once he was on shore, he dived into the crowd and got away. But he was still a long distance from Puddleby and had to come right across the whole breadth of England. He had a terrible time of it. Whenever he passed through a town, all the children ran after him in a crowd, laughing, and often silly people caught hold of him and tried to stop him, so that he had to run up lamp-posts and to climb to chimney-pots to escape from them. At night he used to sleep in the ditches or barns or anywhere he could hide, and he lived on the berries he picked from the hedges and the cobnuts that grew in the copses. At length, after many adventures and narrow squeaks, he saw the tower of Puddleby Church, and knew that at last he was near his old home. When Chee-Chee had finished his story, he ate 6 bananas without stopping and drank a whole bowl full of milk. "My," he said, "why wasn't I born with wings, like Polynesia, so I could fly here? You have no idea how I grew to hate that hat and skirt. I've never been so uncomfortable in my life. All the way from Bristol here, if the wretched hat wasn't falling off my head or catching in the trees, those beastly skirts were tripping me up and getting wound around everything. What on earth do women wear those things for? Goodness, I was glad to see old Puddleby this morning when I climbed over the hill by Bellaby's farm." "Your bed on top of the plate rack in the scullery is all ready for you," said the doctor. "We never had it disturbed in case you might come back." "Yes," said Dab-Dab, "and you can have the old smoking jacket of the doctor's, which you used to use as a blanket in case it's cold in the night." "Thanks," said Chee-Chee. "It's good to be back in the old house again. Everything's just the same as when I left, except the clean roller towel on the back of the door there. That's new. Well, I think I'll go to bed now. I need sleep." Then we all went out of the kitchen into the scullery and watched Chee-Chee climb up the plate rack like a sailor going up a mast. On the top he curled himself up, pulled the old smoking jacket over him, and in a minute he was snoring peacefully. "Good old Chee-Chee," whispered the doctor. "I'm glad he's back." "Yes, good old Chee-Chee," echoed Dab-Dab and Polynesia. Then we all tiptoed out of the scullery and closed the door very gently behind us. End of chapter 14. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Al Hunt, Alberta, Canada. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting, Part 1, Chapter 15. I Become a Doctor's Assistant. When Thursday evening came, there was great excitement at our house. My mother had asked me what were the doctor's favorite dishes, and I had told her: spare ribs, sliced beetroot, fried bread, shrimps, and treacle tart. Tonight she had them all on the table waiting for him, and was now fussing round the house to see if everything was tidy in readiness for his coming. At last we heard a knock upon the door, and of course it was I who got there first to let him in. The doctor had brought his own flute with him this time, and after supper was over, which he enjoyed very much, the table was cleared away and the washing up left in the kitchen sink till the next day. Then the doctor and my father started playing duets. They got so interested in this that I began to be afraid that they would never come to talking over my business. But at last the doctor said, "Your son tells me that he is anxious to become a naturalist." And then began a long talk which lasted far into the night. At first, both my mother and father were rather against the idea, as they had been from the beginning. They said it was only a boyish whim, and that I would get tired of it very soon. But after the matter had been talked over from every side, the doctor turned to my father and said, "Well now, supposing, Mr. Stubbins, that your son came to me for 2 years, that is, until he is 12 years old. During those 2 years, he will have time to see if he is going to grow tired of it or not. Also, during that time, I will promise to teach him reading and writing, and perhaps a little arithmetic as well. What do you say to that?" "I don't know," said my father, shaking his head. "You are very kind, and it is a handsome offer you make, Doctor, but I feel that Tommy ought to be learning some trade by which he can earn his living later on." Then my mother spoke up. Although she was nearly in tears in the prospect of my leaving her house while I was still so young, she pointed out to my father that this was a grand chance for me to get learning. "Now, Jacob," she said, "you know many lads in town have been to the grammar school till they were 14 or 15 years old. Tommy can easily spare these 2 years for his education, and if he learns no more than to read and write, the time will not be lost. Though, goodness knows," she added, getting out her handkerchief to cry, "the house will seem terribly empty when he's gone." "I will take care that he comes to see you, Mrs. Stubbins," said the doctor. "Every day, if you like. After all, we will not be very far away." Well, at length my father gave in, and it was agreed that I was to live with the doctor and work with him for 2 years in exchange for learning to read and write and for my board and lodging. "Of course," added the doctor, "while I have money I will keep Tommy in clothes as well. But money is a very irregular thing with me. Sometimes I have some, and then sometimes I haven't." "You are very good, doctor," said my mother, drying her tears. "It seems to me that Tommy is a very fortunate boy." And then, thoughtless, selfish little imp that I was, I leaned over and whispered in the doctor's ear, "Please don't forget to say something about the voyages." "Oh, by the way," said John Dolittle, "of course occasionally my work requires me to travel. You will have no objection, I take it, to your son's coming with me?" My poor mother looked up sharply, more unhappy and anxious than ever at this new turn, while I stood behind the doctor's chair, my heart thumping with excitement, waiting for my father's answer. "No," he said slowly after a while. "If we agree to the other arrangement, I don't see we've the right to make any objection to that." Well, surely there was never a happier boy in the world than I was at that moment. My head was in the clouds. I trod on air. I could scarcely keep from dancing around the parlor. At last the dream of my life was to come true. At last I was given a chance to seek my fortune, to have adventures. For I knew perfectly well that it was now almost time for the doctor to start upon another voyage. Polynesia had told me that he hardly ever stayed home for more than 6 months at a stretch. Therefore he would be surely going again within a fortnight. And I, Tommy Stubbins, would go with him. Just think of it! To cross the sea, to walk on foreign shores, to roam the world! End of chapter 15.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Carl, St. Louis, Missouri. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting. Part 2, Chapter 1. The Crew of the Curlew. From that time on, of course, my position in town was very different. I was no longer a poor cobbler's son. I carried my nose in the air as I went down the high street with Jip in his gold collar at my side, and snobbish little boys who had despised me before because I was not rich enough to go to school now pointed me out to their friends and whispered, "You see him? He's a doctor's assistant, and only 10 years old." But their eyes would have opened still wider with wonder if they had but known that I and the dog that was with me could talk to one another. 2 days after the doctor had been to our house to dinner, he told me very sadly that he was afraid he would have to give up trying to learn the language of the shellfish, at all events for the present. I'm very discouraged, Stubbins, very. I've tried the mussels and the clams, the oysters and the whelks, cockles and scallops, 7 different kinds of crab, and all the lobster family. I think I'll leave it for the present and go at it again later on. "What will you turn to now?" I asked. "Well, first I shall have to wait till the purple bird of paradise gets here. I must see if she has any messages for me from Long Arrow. She's late. She should have been here 10 days ago. I hope to goodness she's all right." "Well, hadn't we better be seeing about getting a boat?" I said. "She is sure to be here in a day or so, and there will be lots of things to do to get ready in the meantime, won't there?" "Yes, indeed," said the doctor. "Suppose we go down and see your friend Joe, the mussel man. He will know about boats." "I'd like to come too," said Jip. "All right, come along," said the doctor, and off we went. Joe said yes, he had a boat. One he had just bought, but it needed 3 people to sail her. We told him we would like to see it anyway. So the mussel man took us off a little way down the river and showed us the neatest, prettiest little vessel that ever was built. She was called the Curlew. Joe said he would sell her to us cheap, but the trouble was that the boat needed 3 people, while we were only 2. "Of course I shall be taking Chee-Chee," said the doctor, "but although he is very quick and clever, he is not as strong as a man. We really ought to have another person to sail a boat as big as that." "I know of a good sailor, Doctor," said Joe, "a first-class seaman who would be glad of the job." "No, thank you, Joe," said Dr. Dolittle. "I don't want any seamen. I couldn't afford to hire them. And then they hamper me, so seamen do when I'm at sea. They're always wanting to do things the proper way, and I like to do them my way. Now let me see, who could we take with us?" "There's Matthew Mugg, the cat's meat man," I said. "No, he wouldn't do. Matthew's a very nice fellow, but he talks too much, mostly about his rheumatism. You have to be frightfully particular whom you take with you on long voyages." "How about Luke the Hermit?" I asked. "That's a good idea. Splendid, if he'll come. Let's go and talk to him right away." End of Part 2, Chapter 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Carl, St. Louis, Missouri. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting. Part 2, Chapter 2. Luke the Hermit. The Hermit was an old friend of ours, as I have already told you. He was a very particular person. Far out on the marshes he lived in a little bit of a shack, all alone except for his brindle bulldog. No one knew where he came from, not even his name. Just Luke the Hermit, folks called him. He never came into town, never seemed to want to see or to talk to people. His dog, Bob, drove them away if they came near his hut. When you asked anyone in Puddleby who he was, or why he lived out in that lonely place by himself, the only answer you got was, "Oh, Luke the Hermit? Well, there's some mystery about him. Nobody knows what it is, but there's a mystery. Don't go near him. He'll set the dog on you." Nevertheless, there were 2 people who often went out to that little shack on the fens. The doctor and myself. And Bob the bulldog never barked when he heard us coming, for we liked Luke, and Luke liked us. This afternoon, crossing the marshes, we faced a cold wind blowing from the east. As we approached the hut, Jip put up his ears and said, "That's funny." "What's funny?" said the doctor. "That Bob hasn't come out to meet us. He should have heard us long ago, or smelt us. What's that queer noise?" "Sounds to me like a gate creaking," said the doctor. "Maybe it's Luke's door. Only we can't see the door from here. It's on the far side of the shack." "I hope Bob isn't sick," said Jip, and he let out a bark to see if that would call him. But the only answer he got was the wailing of the wind across the wide salt fen. We hurried forward, all 3 of us thinking hard. When we reached the front of the shack, we found the door open, swinging and creaking dismally in the wind. We looked inside. There was no one there. "Isn't Luke at home, then?" said I. "Perhaps he's out for a walk." "He is always at home," said the doctor, frowning in a peculiar sort of way. "And even if he were out for a walk, he wouldn't leave his door banging in the wind behind him. There is something queer about this. What are you doing in there, Jip?" "Nothing much, nothing worth speaking of," said Jip, examining the floor of the hut extremely carefully. "Come here, Jip," said the doctor in a stern voice. "You are hiding something from me. You see signs and you know something, or you guess it. What has happened? Tell me, where is the Hermit?" "I don't know," said Jip, looking very guilty and uncomfortable. "I don't know where he is." "Well, you know something. I can tell it from the look in your eye. What is it?" But Jip didn't answer. For 10 minutes the doctor kept questioning him, but not a word would the dog say. "Well," said the doctor at last, "it is no use our standing around here in the cold. The hermit's gone. That's all. We might as well go home to luncheon." As we buttoned up our coats and started back across the marsh, Jip ran ahead, pretending he was looking for water rats. "He knows something all right," whispered the doctor, "and I think he knows what has happened, too. It's funny. He's not wanting to tell me. He's never done that before. Not in 11 years. He's always told me everything. Strange. Very strange." "Do you mean you think he knows all about the hermit, the big mystery about him which folks hint at, and all that?" "I shouldn't wonder if he did," the doctor answered slowly. "I noticed something in his expression the moment we found that door open and the hut empty. The way he sniffed the floor, too. It told him something, that floor did. He saw signs we couldn't see. I wonder why he won't tell me. I'll try him again. Here, Jip! Jip! Where's the dog? I thought he went on in front." "So did I," said. "He was there a moment ago. I saw him as large as life. Jip! 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 Jip!" Then he was gone. We called and called. We even walked back to the hut. Jip had disappeared. "Oh, well," I said. "Most likely he has just run home ahead of us. He often does that, you know. We'll find him there when we get back to the house." But the doctor just closed his coat collar tighter against the wind and strode on muttering, "Odd. Very odd." End of Part 2, Chapter 2.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Al Hunt, Alberta, Canada. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting. Part 2, Chapter 3, Jip and the Secret. When we reached the house, the first question the doctor asked of Dab-Dab in the hall was, "Is Jip home yet?" "No," said Dab-Dab. "I haven't seen him." "Let me know the moment he comes in, will you please?" said the doctor, hanging up his hat. "Certainly I will," said Dab-Dab. "Don't be long over washing your hands. The lunch is on the table." Just as we were sitting down to luncheon in the kitchen, we heard a great racket at the front door. I ran and opened it. In bounded Jip. "Doctor!" he cried. "Come to the library quick! I've got something to tell you." "No, Dab-Dab, the luncheon must wait." "Please hurry, Doctor. There is not a moment to be lost." "Don't let any of the animals come, just you and Tommy." "Now," he said when we were in the library and the door was closed, "turn the key in the lock and make sure no one is listening under the windows." "It's all right," said the doctor. "Nobody can hear you here. Now what is it?" "Well, Doctor," said Jip. He was badly out of breath from running. "I know all about the hermit. I've known for years, but I couldn't tell you." "Why?" asked the doctor. "Because I'd promised not to tell anyone. It was Bob, his dog, that told me, and I swore to him that I would keep the secret." "Well, and are you going to tell me now?" "Yes," said Jip. "We've got to save him. I followed Bob's scent just now when I left you out there on the marshes, and I found him. And I said to him, 'Is it all right,' I said, 'for me to tell the doctor now? Maybe he can do something.' And Bob says to me, 'Yes,' he says, 'it's all right because—'" "Oh, for heaven's sakes, go on," cried the doctor. "Tell us what the mystery is, not what you said to Bob and what Bob said to you. What has happened? Where is the hermit?" "He's in Puddleby jail," said Jip. "He's in prison." "In prison?" "Yes." "What for? What's he done?" Jip went over to the door and smelt at the bottom of it to see if anyone was listening outside. Then he came back to the doctor on tiptoe and whispered, "He killed a man." "Lord preserve us!" cried the doctor, sitting down heavily in a chair and mopping his forehead with a handkerchief. "When did he do it?" 15 years ago, in a Mexican gold mine. That's why he has been a hermit ever since. He shaved off his beard and kept away from people out there in the marshes so he wouldn't be recognized. But last week it seems these newfangled policemen came to town, and they heard there was a strange man who kept to himself all alone in a shack on the fen, and they got suspicious. For a long time, people had been hunting all over the world for the man that did that killing in the Mexican gold mine 15 years ago. So these policemen went out to the shack, and they recognized Luke by a mole on his arm, and they took him to prison. "Well, well," murmured the doctor. "Who would have thought it? Luke, the philosopher, killed a man. I can hardly believe it." "It's true enough, unfortunately," said Jip. "Luke did it. But it wasn't his fault. Bob says so. And he was there and saw it all. He was scarcely more than a puppy at the time. Bob says Luke couldn't help it. He had to do it." "Where's Bob now?" asked the doctor. "Down at the prison. I wanted him to come here with me to see you, but he won't leave the prison while Luke is there. He just sits outside the door of the prison cell and won't move. He doesn't even eat the food they give him. Won't you please come down there, Doctor, and see if there's anything you can do? The trial is to be this afternoon at 2 o'clock. What time is it now?" "It's 10 minutes past 1. Bob says they think they're going to kill Luke for a punishment if they can prove that he did it, or certainly keep him in prison for the rest of his life. Won't you please come? Perhaps if you spoke to the judge and told him what a good man Luke really is, they'd let him off." "Of course I'll come," said the doctor, getting up and moving to go, "but I'm very much afraid that I shan't be of any real help." He turned at the door and hesitated thoughtfully. "And yet, I wonder." And then he opened the door and passed, out with me and Jip close at his heels. End of Part 2, Chapter 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Al Hunt, Alberta, Canada. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting. Part 2, Chapter 4. Bob. Dab-Dab was terribly upset when she found we were going away again without luncheon. She made us take some cold pork pies in our pockets to eat on the way. When we got to Puddleby Courthouse, it was next door to the prison, we found a great crowd gathered around the building. This was the week of the assizes, a business which happened every 3 months, when many pickpockets and other bad characters were tried by a very grand judge who came all the way from London, and anybody in Puddleby who had nothing special to do used to come to the courthouse to hear the trials. But today was different. The crowd was not made up of just a few idle people. It was enormous. The news had run through the countryside that Luke the Hermit was to be tried for killing a man, and that the great mystery which had hung over him for so long was to be cleared up at last. The butcher and the baker had closed their shops and taken a holiday. All the farmers from round about and all the townsfolk were there with their Sunday clothes on, trying to get seats in the courthouse or gossiping outside in low whispers. The high street was so crowded you could hardly move along it. I had never seen the quiet old town in such a state of excitement before, for Puddleby had not had such an assizes since 1799, when Ferdinand Phipps, the rector's oldest son, had robbed the bank. If I hadn't had the doctor with me, I'm sure I would never have been able to make my way through the mob packed around the courthouse door, but I just followed behind him, hanging on to his coat-tails, and at last we got safely into the jail. "I want to see Luke," said the doctor to a very grand person in a blue coat with brass buttons standing at the door. "Ask at the superintendent's office," said the man. "Third door on the left down the corridor." "Who is that person you spoke to, Doctor?" I asked as we went along the passage. "He's a policeman." "And what are policemen?" "Policemen? They are to keep people in order. They've just been invented by Sir Robert Peel. That's why they are also called peelers sometimes. It is a wonderful age we live in. They're always thinking of something new. This will be the superintendent's office, I suppose." From there, another policeman was sent to show us the way. Outside the door of Luke's cell, we found Bob the bulldog, who wagged his tail sadly when he saw us. The man who was guiding us took a large bunch of keys from his pocket and opened the door. I had never been inside a real prison cell before, and I felt quite a thrill when the policeman went out and locked the door after him, leaving us shut in the dimly lighted little stone room. Before he went, he said that as soon as we had done talking with our friend, we should knock upon the door and he would come and let us out. At first I could hardly see anything, it was so dim inside, but after a little I made out a low bed against the wall under a small barred window. On the bed, staring down at the floor between his feet, sat the hermit, his head resting in his hands. "Well, Luke," said the doctor in a kindly voice, "they don't give you much light in here, do they?" Very slowly the hermit looked up from the floor. "Hulloa, John Dolittle. What brings you here?" "I've come to see you. I would have been here sooner, only I didn't hear about all this until a few minutes ago." I went to your hut to ask if you would join me on a voyage, and when I found it empty, I had no idea where you could be. I am dreadfully sorry to hear about your bad luck. I've come to see if there's anything I can do." Luke shook his head. "No, I don't imagine there is anything that can be done. They've caught me at last. That's the end of it, I suppose." He got up stiffly and started walking up and down the little room. "In a way, I'm glad it's over," he said. "I never got any peace, always thinking they were after me, afraid to speak to anyone. They were bound to get me in the end. Yes, I'm glad it's over." Then the doctor talked to Luke for more than half an hour, trying to cheer him up, while I sat around wondering what I ought to say and wishing I could do something. At last the doctor said he wanted to see Bob, and we knocked upon the door and were let out by the policeman. "Bob," said the doctor to the big bulldog in the passage, "come out with me to the porch. I want to ask you something." "How is he, doctor?" asked Bob, as we walked down the corridor into the courthouse porch. "Oh, Luke's all right. Very miserable, of course, but he's all right. Now tell me, Bob, you saw this business happen, didn't you? You were there when the man was killed, eh?" "I was, doctor," said Bob, "and I'll tell you—" "All right," the doctor interrupted. "That's all I wanted to know for the present. There isn't time to tell me more now. The trial is just going to begin. There are the judge and the lawyers coming up the step. Now listen, Bob. I want you to stay with me when I go into the courtroom, and whatever I tell you to do, do it. Do you understand? Don't make any scenes. Don't bite anybody, no matter what they might say about Luke. Just behave perfectly quietly and answer any question I may ask you truthfully. Do you understand?" "Very well. But do you think you will be able to get him off, doctor?" asked Bob. "He's a good man, doctor. He really is. There never was a better." "We'll see. We'll see, Bob. It's a new thing I'm going to try. I'm not sure the judge will allow it, but, well, we'll see. It's time to go into the courtroom now. Don't forget what I told you. Remember, for heaven's sake, don't start biting anyone, or you'll get us all put out and spoil everything." End of Chapter 4.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Lucy Burgoyne. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting. Part 2, Chapter 5. Mendoza. Inside the courtroom everything was very solemn and wonderful. It was a high, big room. Raised above the floor against the wall was the judge's desk, and here the judge was already sitting, an old, handsome man in a marvellous big wig of grey hair and a gown of black. Below him was another wide, long desk at which lawyers in white wigs sat. The whole thing reminded me of a mixture between a church and a school. "Those 12 men at the side," whispered the doctor, "those in pews like a choir, they are what is called the jury. It is they who decide whether Luke is guilty, whether he did it or not." "And look," I said, "there's Luke himself in a sort of pulpit thing, with policemen each side of him. And there's another pulpit, the same kind, the other side of the room. See? Only that one's empty." "That one is called the witness box," said the doctor. "Now I'm going down to speak to one of those men in white wigs, and I want you to wait here and keep these 2 seats for us. Bob will stay with you. Keep an eye on him. Better hold on to his collar. I shan't be more than a minute or so." With that the doctor disappeared into the crowd which filled the main part of the room. Then I saw the judge take a funny little wooden hammer and knock on his desk with it. This, it seemed, was to make people keep quiet, for immediately everyone stopped buzzing and talking and began to listen very respectfully. Then another man in a black gown stood up and began reading from a paper in his hand. He mumbled away exactly as though he were saying his prayers and didn't want anyone to understand what language they were in. But I managed to catch a few words. Biz, 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 otherwise known as Luke the Hermit, of biz, 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 for killing his partner with biz, 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 otherwise known as Bluebeard Bill, on the night of the biz, 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 in the biz, 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 biz of Mexico, therefore Her Majesty's biz, 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 biz. At this moment I felt someone take hold of my arm from the back, and turning round I found the doctor had returned with one of the men in white wigs. "Stubbins, this is Mr. Percy Jenkins," said the doctor. "He is Luke's lawyer. It is his business to get Luke off, if he can." Mr. Jenkins seemed to be an extremely young man with a round smooth face like a boy. He shook hands with me and then immediately turned and went on talking with the doctor. "Oh, I think it is a perfectly precious idea," he was saying. "Of course the dog must be admitted as a witness. He was the only one who saw the thing take place. I'm awfully glad you came. I wouldn't have missed this for anything. My hat! Won't it make the old court sit up? They're always frightfully dull, these assizes, but this will stir things. A bulldog witness for the defence. I do hope there are plenty of reporters present. Yes, there's one making a sketch of the prisoner. I shall become known after this, and won't Conky be pleased? My hat!" He put his hand over his mouth to smother a laugh, and his eyes fairly sparkled with mischief. "Who is Conky?" I asked the doctor. "Shh! He is speaking of the judge up there, the Honourable Eustace Beauchamp Conkling." "Now," said Mr. Jenkins, bringing out a notebook, "tell me a little more about yourself, doctor. You took your degree as Doctor of Medicine at Durham, I think you said, and the name of your last book was—" I could not hear any more, for they talked in whispers, and I fell to looking round the court again. Of course I could not understand everything that was going on, though it was all very interesting. People kept getting up in the place the doctor called the witness box, and the lawyers at the long table asked them questions about the night of the 29th. Then the people would get down again, and somebody else would get up and be questioned. One of the lawyers, who, the doctor told me afterwards, was called the prosecutor, seemed to be doing his best to get the hermit into trouble by asking questions which made it look as though he had always been a very bad man. He was a nasty lawyer, this prosecutor with a long nose. Most of the time I could hardly keep my eyes off poor Luke, who sat there between his two policemen, staring at the floor as though he weren't interested. The only time I saw him take any notice at all was when a small dark man with wicked little watery eyes got up into the witness box. I heard Bob snarl under my chair as this person came into the courtroom, and Luke's eyes just blazed with anger and contempt. This man said his name was Mendoza, and that he was the one who had guided the Mexican police to the mine after Bluebeard Bill had been killed, and at every word he said I could hear Bob down below me muttering between his teeth, "It's a lie, it's a lie, I'll chew his face, it's a lie." And both the doctor and I had hard work keeping the dog under the seat. Then I noticed that our Mr. Jenkins had disappeared from the doctor's side, but presently I saw him stand up at the long table to speak to the judge. "Your Honour," said he, "I wish to introduce a new witness for the defence, Dr. John Dolittle, the naturalist. Will you please step into the witness stand, Doctor?" There was a buzz of excitement as the doctor made his way across the crowded room, and I noticed the nasty lawyer with the long nose lean down and whisper something to a friend, smiling in an ugly way which made me want to pinch him. Then Mr. Jenkins asked the doctor a whole lot of questions about himself and made him answer in a loud voice so the whole court could hear. He finished up by saying, "And you are prepared to swear, Dr. Dolittle, that you understand the language of dogs and can make them understand you? Is that so?" "Yes," said the doctor, "that is so." "And what, might I ask, put in the judge in a very quiet, dignified voice, has all this to do with the killing of, Bluebeard Bill? This, Your Honour, said Mr. Jenkins, talking in a very grand manner as though he were on a stage in a theatre. There is in this courtroom at the present moment a bulldog, who was the only living thing that saw the man killed. With the court's permission, I propose to put that dog in the witness stand and have him questioned before you by the eminent scientist, Dr. John Dolittle. End of chapter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Lucy Burgoyne. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting. Part 2, Chapter 6. The Judge's Dog. At first there was a dead silence in the court. Then everybody began whispering or giggling at the same time, till the whole room sounded like a great hive of bees. Many people seemed to be shocked, most of them were amused, and a few were angry. Presently up sprang the nasty lawyer with the long nose. "I protest, Your Honour," he cried, waving his arms wildly to the judge. "I object. The dignity of this court is in peril. I protest." "I am the one to take care of the dignity of this court," said the judge. Then Mr. Jenkins got up again. If it hadn't been such a serious matter, it was almost like a Punch and Judy show. Somebody was always popping down and somebody else popping up. "If there is any doubt on the score of our being able to do as we say, Your Honour will have no objection, I trust, to the doctor's giving the court a demonstration of his powers, of showing that he actually can understand the speech of animals?" I thought I saw a twinkle of amusement come into the old judge's eyes as he sat considering a moment before he answered. "No," he said at last, "I don't think so." Then he turned to the doctor. "Are you quite sure you can do this?" he asked. "Quite, Your Honour," said the doctor. "Quite sure." "Very well then," said the judge. "If you can satisfy us that you really are able to understand canine testimony, the dog shall be admitted as a witness. I do not see, in that case, how I could object to his being heard. But I warn you that if you are trying to make a laughing-stock of this court, it will go hard with you." "I protest, I protest," yelled the long-nosed prosecutor. "This is a scandal, an outrage to the bar." "Sit down," said the judge in a very stern voice. "What animal does Your Honour wish me to talk with?" asked the doctor. "I would like you to talk to my own dog," said the judge. "He is outside in the cloakroom. I will have him brought in, and then we shall see what you can do." Then someone went out and fetched the judge's dog, a lovely great Russian wolfhound with slender legs and a shaggy coat. He was a proud and beautiful creature. "Now, doctor," said the judge, "did you ever see this dog before? Remember you were in the witness stand and under oath." "No, Your Honour, I never saw him before." "Very well then, will you please ask him to tell you what I had for supper last night? He was with me and watched me while I ate." Then the doctor and the dog started talking to one another in signs and sounds, and they kept at it for quite a long time, and the doctor began to giggle and get so interested that he seemed to forget all about the court and the judge and everything else. "What a time he takes," I heard a fat woman in front of me whispering. "He's only pretending. Of course he can't do it. Who ever heard of talking to a dog? He must think we're children." "Haven't you finished yet?" the judge asked the doctor. "It shouldn't take that long just to ask what I had for supper." "Oh, no, Your Honour," said the doctor. "The dog told me that long ago. But then he went on to tell me what you did after supper." "Never mind that," said the judge. Tell me what answer he gave you to my question." "He says you had a mutton chop, 2 baked potatoes, a pickled walnut and a glass of ale." The Honourable Eustace Beauchamp Conkley went white to the lips. "Sounds like witchcraft," he muttered. "I never dreamed." "And after your supper," the doctor went on, "he says you went to see a prize fight, and then sat up playing cards for money till 12 o'clock and came home singing, 'We won't get—'" "That will do," the judge interrupted. "I am satisfied you can do as you say. The prisoner's dog shall be admitted as a witness." "I protest, I object," screamed the prosecutor. "Your Honour, this is—" "Sit down," roared the judge. "I say the dog shall be heard. That ends the matter. Put the witness in the stand." And then, for the first time in the solemn history of England, a dog was put in the witness stand of Her Majesty's Court of Assizes. And it was I, Tommy Stubbins, when the doctor made a sign to me across the room, who proudly led Bob up the aisle, through the astonished crowd, past the frowning, spluttering, long-nosed prosecutor, and made him comfortable on a high chair in the witness box, from where the old bulldog sat, scowling down over the rail upon the amazed and gaping jury. End of chapter.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Al Hunt, Alberta, Canada. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting. Part 2, Chapter 7. The End of the Mystery. The trial went swiftly forward after that. Mr. Jenkins told the doctor to ask Bob what he saw on the night of the 29th, and when Bob had told all he knew and the doctor had turned it into English for the judge and the jury, this is what he had to say. On the night of the 29th of November, 1824, I was with my master, Luke Fitzjohn, otherwise known as Luke the Hermit, and his 2 partners, Manuel Mendoza and William Boggs, otherwise known as Bluebeard Bill, on their gold mine in Mexico. For a long time these 3 men had been hunting for gold, and they had dug a deep hole in the ground. On the morning of the 29th, gold was discovered, lots of it, at the bottom of this hole. And all 3, my master and his 2 partners, were very happy about it because they knew that they would be rich. But Manuel Mendoza asked Bluebeard Bill to go for a walk with him. These 2 men I had always suspected of being bad. So when I noticed that they had left my master behind, I followed them secretly to see what they were up to. And in a deep cave in the mountains, I heard them arrange together to kill Luke the Hermit, so that they should get all the gold, and he have none. At this point the judge asked, "Where is the witness Mendoza? Constable, see that he does not leave the court." But the wicked little man with the watery eyes had already sneaked out when no one was looking, and he was never seen in Puddleby again. Then, Bob's statement went on, I went to my master and tried very hard to make him understand that his partners were dangerous men, but it was no use. He did not understand dog language, so I did the next best thing. I never let him out of my sight, but stayed with him every moment of the day and night. Now the hole that they had made was so deep that to get down and up it, you had to go in a big bucket tied on the end of a rope. And the 3 men used to haul one another up and let one another down the mine this way. That was how the gold was brought up too, in the bucket. Well, about 7 o'clock in the evening, my master was standing at the top of the mine, hauling up Bluebeard Bill, who was in the bucket. Just as he had got Bill halfway up, I saw Mendoza come out of the hut where we all lived. Mendoza thought that Bill was away buying groceries, but he wasn't. He was in the bucket. And when Mendoza saw Luke hauling and straining on the rope, he thought he was pulling up a bucket full of gold. So he drew a pistol from his pocket and came sneaking up behind Luke to shoot him. I barked and barked to warn my master of the danger he was in, but he was so busy hauling up Bill, who was a heavy fat man, that he took no notice of me. I saw that if I didn't do something quick, he would surely be shot. So I did a thing I'd never done before. Suddenly and savagely, I bit my master on the leg from behind. Luke was so hurt and startled that he did just what I wanted him to do. He let go of the rope with both hands at once and turned around. And then, crash! Down went Bill in his bucket to the bottom of the mine, and he was killed. While my master was busy scolding me, Mendoza put his pistol in his pocket, came up with a smile on his face, and looked down the mine. "Why, good gracious," said he to Luke, "you've killed Bluebeard Bill. I must go and tell the police," hoping, you see, to get the whole mine to himself when Luke should be put in prison. Then he jumped on his horse and galloped away. And soon my master grew afraid, for he saw that if Mendoza only told enough lies to the police, it would look as though he had killed Bill on purpose. So while Mendoza was gone, he and I stole away together secretly and came to England. Here he shaved off his beard and became a hermit. And ever since, for 15 years, we've remained in hiding. This is all I have to say, and I swear it is the truth, every word. When the doctor finished reading Bob's long speech, the excitement among the 12 men of the jury was positively terrific. One, a very old man with white hair, began to weep in a loud voice at the thought of poor Luke hiding on the fen for 15 years for something he couldn't help, and all the others set to whispering and nodding their heads to one another. In the middle of all this, up got that horrible prosecutor again, waving his arms more wildly than ever. "Your Honor," he cried, "I must object to this evidence as biased. Of course the dog would not tell the truth against his own master. I object. I protest." "Very well," said the judge. "You are at liberty to cross-examine. It is your duty as prosecutor to prove his evidence untrue. There is the dog. Question him if you do not believe what he says." I thought the long-nosed lawyer would have a fit. He looked first at the dog, then at the doctor, then at the judge, then back at the dog scowling from the witness box. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came. He waved his arms some more. His face got redder and redder. At last, clutching his forehead, he sank weakly into his seat and had to be helped out of the courtroom by 2 friends. As he was half carried through the door, he was feebly murmuring, "I protest, I object, I protest." End of Part 2, Chapter 7.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Danielle Flores in Queen Creek, Arizona, on February 2nd, 2007. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting. Part 2, Chapter 8. The 8th chapter, 3 Cheers. Next, the judge made a very long speech to the jury, and when it was over, all the 12 jurymen got up and went out into the next room, and at that point the doctor came back, leading Bob to the seat beside me. "What have the jurymen gone out for?" I asked. "They always do that at the end of a trial, to make up their minds whether the prisoner did it or not. Couldn't you and Bob go in and help them and make up their minds the right way?" I asked. "No, that's not allowed. They have to talk it over in secret. Sometimes it takes—" My gracious, look, they're coming back already. They didn't spend time long over it. Everybody kept quite still while the 12 men came tramping back into their places in the pews. Then one of them, the leader, a little man, stood up and turned to the judge. Everyone was holding his breath, especially the doctor and myself, to see what he was going to say. You could have heard a pin drop while the whole courtroom, the whole of Puddleby in fact, waited with craning necks and straining ears to hear the weighty words. "Your Honor," said the little man, "the jury returns a verdict of not guilty." "What's that mean?" I asked, turning to the doctor. But I found Dr. John Dolittle, the famous naturalist, standing on top of a chair, dancing about on one leg like a schoolboy. "It means he's free," he cried. "Luke is free! Then he'll be able to come on the voyage with us, won't he?" But I could not hear his answer, for the whole courtroom seemed to be jumping up on chairs like the doctor. The crowd had suddenly gone crazy. All the people were laughing and calling and waving to Luke to show him how glad they were that he was free. The noise was deafening. Then it stopped. All was quiet again, and the people stood up respectfully while the judge left the court. For the trial of Luke the Hermit, the famous trial which to this day they are still talking of in Puddleby, was over. In the hush while the judge was leaving, a sudden shriek rang out, and there, in the doorway, stood a woman, her arms outstretched to the hermit. "Luke," she cried, "I've found you at last." "It's his wife," the fat woman in front of me whispered. "She ain't seen him in 15 years, poor dear. What a lovely reunion. I'm glad I came. I wouldn't have missed this for anything." As soon as the judge had gone, the noise broke out again, and now the folks gathered around Luke and his wife and shook them by the hand and congratulated them and laughed over them and cried over them. "Come along, Stubbins," said the doctor, taking me by the arm. "Let's get out of this while we can." "But aren't you going to speak to Luke?" I said, "to ask him if he'll come on the voyage?" "It wouldn't be a bit of use," said the doctor. "His wife's come for him. No man stands any chance of going on a voyage when his wife hasn't seen him in 15 years. Come along, let's get home to tea. We didn't have any lunch, remember? And we've earned something to eat. We'll have one of those mixed meals, lunch and tea combined, with watercress and ham. Nice change. Come along." Just as we were going to step out at the side door, I heard this crowd shouting, "The doctor! The doctor! Where's the doctor? The hermit would have hanged if it hadn't been for the doctor. Speech! Speech! The doctor!" And a man came running up to us and said, "The people are calling for you, sir." "I'm very sorry," said the doctor, "but I'm in a hurry." "The crowd won't be denied, sir," said the man. "They want you to make a speech in the marketplace." "Beg them to excuse me," said the doctor, "with my compliments. I have an appointment at my house, a very important one which I may not break. Tell Luke to make a speech. Come along, Stubbins, this way." "Oh, Lord," he muttered as we got out into the open air and found another crowd waiting for him at the side door. "Let's go up that alleyway to the left. Quick, run!" We took to our heels, darted through a couple of side streets, and just managed to get away from the crowd. It was not till we had gained the Oxenthorpe Road that we dared to slow down to a walk and take our breath. And even when we reached the doctor's gate and turned to look backwards toward the town, the faint murmur of many noises still reached us on the evening wind. "They're still clamoring for you," I said. "Listen." The murmur suddenly swelled up into a low, distant roar, and although it was a mile and a half away, you could distinctly hear the words. "3 cheers for Luke the Hermit, hooray! 3 cheers for his dog, hooray! 3 cheers for his wife, hooray! 3 cheers for the doctor, hooray, hooray, hooray!" End of Part 2, Chapter 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Danielle Flores in Queen Creek, Arizona on February 3, 2007. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting. Part 2, Chapter 9. The 9th Chapter. The Purple Bird of Paradise. Polynesia was waiting for us on the front porch. She looked full of some important news. "Doctor," said she, "the purple bird of paradise has arrived." "At last," said the doctor. I had begun to fear some accident had befallen her. "And how is Miranda?" From the excited way in which the doctor fumbled his key into the lock, I guessed that we were not going to get our tea right away, even now. "Oh, she seemed all right when she arrived," said Polynesia, tired from her long journey, of course, but otherwise all right. "But what do you think? That mischief-making sparrow, Cheapside, insulted her as soon as she came into the garden. When I arrived on the scene, she was in tears and was all for turning round and going straight back to Brazil tonight. I had the hardest work persuading her to wait until you came. She's in the study. I shut Cheapside in one of your bookcases and told him I'd tell you exactly what had happened the moment you got home." The doctor frowned, then walked silently and quickly to the study. Here we found the candles lit, for the daylight was nearly gone. Dab-Dab was standing on the floor, mounting guard over one of the glass-fronted bookcases in which Cheapside had been imprisoned. The noisy little sparrow was still fluttering angrily behind the glass when we came in. In the center of the big table, perched on the inkstand, stood the most beautiful bird I had ever seen. She had a deep, violet-colored breast, scarlet wings, and a long, long, sweeping tail of gold. She was unimaginably beautiful, but looked dreadfully tired. Already she had her head under her wing, and she swayed gently from side to side on top of the inkstand, like a bird that has flown long and far. "Shh," said Dab-Dab. "Miranda is asleep. I've got this little imp Cheapside in here. Listen, Doctor, for heaven's sake, send that sparrow away before he does any more mischief. He's nothing but a vulgar little nuisance. We've had a perfectly awful time trying to get Miranda to stay. Shall I serve your tea in here, or will you come into the kitchen when you're ready?" "We'll come into the kitchen, Dab-Dab," said the doctor. "Let Cheapside out before you go, please." Dab-Dab opened the bookcase door, and Cheapside strutted out, trying hard not to look guilty. "Cheapside," said the doctor sternly, "what did you say to Miranda when she arrived?" "I didn't say nothing, Doc. Straight I didn't. That is, nothing much. I was picking up crumbs off the gravel path when she comes swanking into the garden, turning up her nose in all directions, as though she owned the earth, just because she's got a lot of colored plumage. A London sparrow's as good as her any day. I don't hold by these gaudy bedizened foreigners anyhow. Why don't they stay in their own country?" "But what did you say to her that got her so offended?" "All I said was, 'You don't belong in an English garden. You ought to be in a milliner's window.' That's all. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, Cheapside. Don't you realize that this bird has come thousands of miles to see me, only to be insulted by your impertinent tongue as soon as she reaches my garden? What do you mean by it? If she had gone away again before I got back tonight, I would have never forgiven you. Leave the room." Sheepishly, but still trying to look as though he didn't care, Cheapside hopped out into the passage, and Dab-Dab closed the door. The doctor went up to the beautiful bird on the inkstand and gently stroked its back. Instantly its head popped out from under its wing. End of Part 2, Chapter 9. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Danielle Flores in Queen Creek, Arizona, on February 7th, 2007. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting. Part 2, Chapter 10, Long Arrow, the son of Golden Arrow. "Well, Miranda," said the doctor, "I'm terribly sorry this has happened. But you mustn't mind Cheapside. He doesn't know any better. He's a city bird, and all his life he has had to squabble for a living. You must make allowances. He doesn't know any better." Miranda stretched her gorgeous wings wearily. Now that I saw her awake and moving, I noticed what a superior, well-bred manner she had. There were tears in her eyes, and her beak was trembling. "I wouldn't have minded so much," she said in a high, silvery voice, "if I hadn't been so dreadfully worn out. That and something else," she added beneath her breath. "Did you have a hard time getting here?" asked the doctor. "The worst passage I ever made," said Miranda. "The weather, well, there. What's the use? I'm here anyway." "Tell me," said the doctor, as though he had been impatiently waiting to say something for a long time, "what did Long Arrow say when you gave him my message?" The purple bird of paradise hung her head. "That's the worst part of it," she said. "I might almost as well have not come at all. I wasn't able to deliver your message. I couldn't find him. Long Arrow, the son of Golden Arrow, has disappeared." "Disappeared?" cried the doctor. "Why, what's become of him?" "Nobody knows," Miranda answered. "He had often disappeared before, as I have told you, so that the Indians didn't know where he was. But it's a mighty hard thing to hide away from the birds. I had always been able to find some owl or martin who could tell me where he was, if I wanted to know, but not this time. That's why I'm nearly a fortnight late in coming to you. I kept hunting and hunting, asking everywhere. I went over the whole length and breadth of South America, and there wasn't a living thing could tell me where he was." There was a sad silence in the room after she had finished. The doctor was frowning in a peculiar sort of way, and Polynesia scratched her head. "Did you ask the black parrots?" asked Polynesia. "They usually know everything." "Certainly I did," said Miranda, "and I was so upset at not being able to find out anything that I forgot all about observing the weather signs before I started my flight here. I didn't even bother to break my journey at the Azores, but cut right across, breaking for the Straits of Gibraltar, as though it were June or July. And, of course, I ran into a perfectly frightful storm in mid-Atlantic. I really thought I'd never come through it. Luckily, I found a piece of a wrecked vessel floating in the sea after the storm had partly died down, and I roosted on it and took some sleep. If I hadn't been able to take that rest, I wouldn't be here to tell the tale." "Poor Miranda, what a time you must have had," said the doctor. "But tell me, were you able to find out whereabouts Long Arrow was last seen?" "Yes. A young albatross told me he had seen him on Spider Monkey Island." "Spider Monkey Island? That's somewhere off the coast of Brazil, isn't it?" "Yes, that's it. Of course, I flew there right away and asked every bird on the island, and it is a big island, 100 miles long. It seemed that Long Arrow was visiting some peculiar Indians that live there, looking for rare medicine plants. I got that from a tame hawk, a pet, which the chief of Indians keeps for hunting partridges with. I nearly got caught and put in a cage for my pains, too. That's the worst of having beautiful feathers. It's as much as your life is worth to go near most humans. They say, 'Oh, how pretty,' and shoot an arrow or a bullet into you. You and Long Arrow were the only two men that I would ever trust myself near out of all the people in the world. But he was never known to have returned from the mountains? No, that was the last that was seen or heard of him. I questioned the seabirds around the shores to find out if he had left the island in a canoe, but they could tell me nothing." "Do you think that some accident has happened to him?" asked the doctor in a fearful voice. "I'm afraid it must have," said Miranda, shaking her head. "Well," said John Dolittle slowly, "if I could never meet Long Arrow face to face, it would be the greatest disappointment in my whole life. Not only that, but it would be a great loss to the knowledge of the human race, for, from what you have told me of him, he knew more natural science than all the rest of us put together, and if he is gone without anyone to write it down for him, so the world may be the better for it, it would be a terrible thing. But you don't really think that he is dead, do you?" "What else can I think?" asked Miranda, bursting into tears, "when for 6 whole months he has not been seen by flesh, fish, or fowl." End of Part 2, Chapter 10.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ada Kerman, Portland, Oregon. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting, Part 2, Chapter 11, Blind Travel. This news about Long Arrow made us all very sad, and I could see from the silent, dreamy way the doctor took his tea that he was dreadfully upset. Every once in a while he would stop eating altogether and sit staring at the spots on the kitchen tablecloth as though his thoughts were far away, till Dab-Dab, who was watching to see that he got a good meal, would cough or rattle the pots in the sink. I did my best to cheer him up by reminding him of all that he had done for Luke and his wife that afternoon, and when that didn't seem to work, I went on talking about our preparations for the voyage. "But you see, Stubbins," said he as we rose from the table and Dab-Dab and Chee-Chee began to clear away, "I don't know where to go now. I feel sort of lost since Miranda brought me this news. On this voyage I had planned going to see Long Arrow. I had been looking forward to it for a whole year. I felt he might help me in learning the language of the shellfish, and perhaps in finding some way of getting to the bottom of the sea. But now he's gone, and all his great knowledge has gone with him." Then he seemed to fall a dreaming again. "Just to think of it," he murmured, "Long Arrow and I, 2 students. Although I'd never met him, I felt as though I knew him quite well. For in his way, without any schooling, he has, all his life, been trying to do the very things which I have tried to do in mine. And now he's gone. A whole world lay between us, and only a bird knew us both. We went back into the study where Jip brought the doctor his slippers and his pipe. And after the pipe was lit and the smoke began to fill the room, the old man seemed to cheer up a little. "But you will go on some voyage, Doctor, won't you?" I asked, "even if you can't go to find Long Arrow." He looked up sharply into my face, and I suppose he saw how anxious I was, because he suddenly smiled his old boyish smile and said, "Yes, Stubbins, don't worry, we'll go. We mustn't stop working and learning, even if poor Long Arrow has disappeared. But where to go? That's the question. Where shall we go?" There were so many places that I wanted to go that I couldn't make up my mind right away. And while I was still thinking, the doctor sat up in his chair and said, "I tell you what we'll do, Stubbins. It's a game I used to play when I was young, before Sarah came to live with me. I used to call it blind travel. Whenever I wanted to go on a voyage and I couldn't make up my mind where to go, I would take the atlas and open it with my eyes shut. Next, I'd wave a pencil, still without looking, and stick it down on whatever page had fallen open. Then I'd open my eyes and look. It's a very exciting game, is blind travel, because you have to swear before you begin that you will go to the place the pencil touches, come what may. Shall we play it?" "Oh, let's!" I almost yelled. "How thrilling! I hope it's China, or Borneo, or Baghdad." And in a moment I had scrambled up the bookcase, dragged the big atlas from the top shelf, and laid it on the table before the doctor. I knew every page in that atlas by heart. How many days and nights I had lingered over its old faded maps, following the blue rivers from the mountains to the sea, wondering what the little towns really looked like, and how wide were the sprawling lakes. I had had a lot of fun with that atlas, traveling in my mind all over the world. I can see it now. The first page had no map. It just told you that it was printed in Edinburgh in 1808, and a whole lot more about the book. The next page was the solar system, showing the sun and planets, the stars and the moon. The third page was the chart of the North and South Poles. Then came the hemispheres, the oceans, the continents, and the countries. As the doctor began sharpening his pencil, a thought came to me. "What if the pencil falls upon the North Pole?" I asked. "Will we have to go there?" "No, the rules of the game say you don't have to go to any place you've been to before. You are allowed another try. I've been to the North Pole," he ended quietly, "so we shan't have to go there." I could hardly speak with astonishment. "You've been to the North Pole?" I managed to gasp out at last, but I thought it was still undiscovered. The map shows all the places explorers have reached to, trying to get there. Why isn't your name down if you discovered it?" "I promised to keep it a secret, and you must promise me never to tell anyone. Yes, I discovered the North Pole in April 1809. But shortly after I got there, the polar bears came to me in a body and told me there was a great deal of coal there, buried beneath the snow. They knew, they said, that human beings would do anything and go anywhere to get coal, so would I please keep it a secret? Because once people began coming up there to start coal mines, their beautiful white country would be spoiled, and there was nowhere else in the world cold enough for polar bears to be comfortable. So of course I had to promise them I would. Ah, well, it will be discovered again some day by somebody else. But I want the polar bears to have their playground to themselves as long as possible. And I dare say it will be a good while yet, for it certainly is a fiendish place to get to. Well now, are we ready? Good. Take the pencil and stand here close to the table. When the book falls open, wave the pencil round 3 times and jab it down. Ready? All right. Shut your eyes. It was a tense and fearful moment, but very thrilling. We both had our eyes shut tight. I heard the atlas fall open with a bang. I wondered what page it was, England or Asia. If it should be the map of Asia, so much would depend on where that pencil would land. I waved 3 times in a circle. I began to lower my hand. The pencil point touched the page. All right, I called out. It's done. End of Part 2, Chapter 11. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ada Kerman, Portland, Oregon. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting. Part 2, Chapter 12, Destiny and Destination. We both opened our eyes, then bumped our heads together with a crack in our eagerness to lean over and see where we were to go. The atlas lay open at a map called Chart of the South Atlantic Ocean. My pencil point was resting right in the center of a tiny island. The name of it was printed so small that the doctor had to get out his strong spectacles to read it. I was trembling with excitement. Spider Monkey Island, he read out slowly. Then he whistled softly beneath his breath. Of all the extraordinary things, you've hit upon the very island where Long Arrow was last seen on Earth. I wonder. Well, well, how very singular. We'll go there, Doctor, won't we? I asked. Of course we will. The rules of the game say we've got to. I'm so glad it wasn't Oxenthorpe or Bristol, I said. It'll be a grand voyage, this. Look at all the sea we've got to cross. Will it take us long? Oh, no, said the doctor, not very. With a good boat and a good wind, we should make it easily in 4 weeks. But isn't it extraordinary? Of all the places in the world, you picked out that one with your eyes shut. Spider Monkey Island, after all. Well, there's one good thing about it. I shall be able to get some jabizri beetles. What are jabizri beetles? They are a very rare kind of beetles with peculiar habits. I want to study them. There are only 3 countries in the world where they are to be found. Spider Monkey Island is one of them, but even there they are very scarce. What is this little question mark after the name of the island for? I asked, pointing to the map. That means that the island's position in the ocean is not known very exactly, that it is somewhere about there. Ships have probably seen it in that neighborhood, that is all, most likely. It is quite possible we shall be the first white men to land there, but I dare say we shall have some difficulty in finding it first. How like a dream it all sounded. The 2 of us sitting there at the big study table, the candles lit, the smoke curling towards the dim ceiling from the doctor's pipe, the 2 of us sitting there, talking about finding an island in the ocean and being the first white men to land upon it. I'll bet it will be a great voyage, I said. It looks a lovely island on the map. Will there be black men there? No, a peculiar tribe of red Indians lives on it, Miranda tells me. At this point the poor bird of paradise stirred and woke up. In our excitement we had forgotten to speak low. We are going to Spider Monkey Island, Miranda, said the doctor. You know where it is, do you not? I know where it was the last time I saw it, said the bird, but whether it will be there still I can't say. What do you mean? Asked the doctor. It is always in the same place, surely. Not by any means, said Miranda. Why, didn't you know? Spider Monkey Island is a floating island. It moves around all over the place, usually somewhere near southern South America. But of course I could surely find it for you if you want to go there. At this fresh piece of news I could contain myself no longer. I was bursting to tell someone. I ran dancing and singing from the room to find Chi-Chi. At the door I tripped over Dab-Dab, who was just coming in with her wings full of plates, and fell headlong on my nose. Has the boy gone crazy? Cried the duck. Where do you think you're going, Ninny? To Spider Monkey Island, I shouted, picking myself up and doing cartwheels down the hall. Spider Monkey Island. Hooray! And it's a floating island. You're going to Bedlam, I should say, snorted the housekeeper. Look what you've done to my best china. But I was far too happy to listen to her scolding, and I ran on, singing, into the kitchen to find Chi-Chi. End of Part 2, Chapter 12. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ada Kerman, Portland, Oregon. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting. Part 3, Chapter 1, The Third Man. That same week we began our preparations for the voyage. Joe, the muscle man, had the curlew moved down the river and tied it up along the river wall so it would be more handy for loading. And for 3 whole days we carried provisions down to our beautiful new boat and stowed them away. I was surprised to find how roomy and big she was inside. There were 3 little cabins, a saloon, or dining room, and underneath all this a big place called the hold, where the food and extra sails and other things were kept. I think Joe must have told everybody in the town about our coming voyage, because there was always a regular crowd watching us when we brought the things down to put aboard. And of course sooner or later old Matthew Mugg was bound to turn up. My goodness, Tommy, said he, as he watched me carrying on some sacks of flour, but that's a pretty boat. Where might the doctor be going to this voyage? We're going to Spider Monkey Island, I said proudly. And be you the only one the doctor's taking along? Well, he has spoken of wanting to take another man, I said, but so far he hasn't made up his mind. Matthew grunted, then squinted up at the graceful masts of the curlew. You know, Tommy, said he, if it wasn't for my rheumatism, I've half a mind to come with the doctor myself. There's something about a boat standing ready to sail that always did make me feel venturesome and travelish-like. What's that stuff in the cans you're taking on? This is treacle, I said, 20 pounds of treacle. My goodness, he sighed, turning away sadly. That makes me feel more like going with you than ever. But my rheumatism is that bad I can't hardly. I didn't hear any more, for Matthew had moved off, still mumbling, into the crowd that stood about the wharf. The clock in Puddleby Church struck noon, and I turned back, feeling very busy and important to the task of loading. But it wasn't very long before someone else came along and interrupted my work. This was a huge, big, burly man with a red beard and tattoo marks all over his arms. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, spat twice onto the river wall, and said, "Boy, where's the skipper?" "The skipper? Who do you mean?" I asked. "The captain. Where's the captain of this craft?" he said, pointing to the Curlew. "Oh, you mean the doctor," said I. "Well, he isn't here at the present." At that moment the doctor arrived with his arms full of notebooks and butterfly nets and glass cases and other natural history things. The big man went up to him, respectfully touching his cap. "Good morning, Captain," said he. "I heard you was in need of hands for a voyage. My name's Ben Butcher, able seaman." "I am very glad to know you," said the doctor, "but I'm afraid I shan't be able to take on any more crew." "Why, but Captain," said the able seaman, "you surely ain't going to face deep-sea weather with nothing more than this bit of a lad to help you, and with a cutter that big." The doctor assured him that he was, but the man didn't go away. He hung around and argued. He told us he had known of many ships being sunk through undermanning. He got out what he called his stiffy kit, a paper which said what a good sailor he was, and implored us, if we valued our lives, to take him. But the doctor was quite firm, polite but determined, and finally the man walked sorrowfully away, telling us he never expected to see us alive again. Callers of one sort and another kept us quite busy that morning. The doctor had no sooner gone below to stow away his notebooks than another visitor appeared upon the gangplank. This was a most extraordinary-looking black man. The only other Negroes I had seen had been in circuses, where they wore feathers and bone necklaces and things like that. But this one was dressed in a fashionable frock coat with an enormous bright red cravat. On his head was a straw hat with a gay band, and over this he held a large green umbrella. He was very smart in every respect except his feet. He wore no shoes or socks. "Pardon me," said he, bowing elegantly, "but is this the ship of the physician Dolittle?" "Yes," I said. "Did you wish to see him?" "I did, if it will not be discommodious," he answered. "Who shall I say it is?" "I am Bumpo Kaboobo, Crown Prince of Jolliginki." I ran downstairs at once and told the doctor. "How fortunate!" cried John Dolittle. "My old friend Bumpo." "Well, well, he's studying at Oxford, you know. How good of him to come all this way to call on me." And he tumbled up the ladder to greet his visitor. The strange black man seemed to be overcome with joy when the doctor appeared and shook him warmly by the hand. "News reached me," he said, "that you were about to sail upon a voyage. I hastened to see you before your departure. I am sublimely ecstasied that I did not miss you." "You very nearly did miss us," said the doctor. "As it happened, we were delayed somewhat in getting the necessary number of men to sail our boat. If it hadn't been for that, we would have been gone 3 days ago." "How many men does your ship's company yet require?" asked Bumpo. "Only one," said the doctor, "but it is so hard to find the right one." "Methinks I detect something of the finger of destination in this," said Bumpo. "How would I do?" "Splendidly," said the doctor. "But what about your studies? You can't very well just go off and leave your university career to take care of itself, you know." "I need a holiday," said Bumpo. "Even had I not gone with you, I intended at the end of this term to take a 3 months' absconsion. But besides, I shall not be neglecting my edification if I accompany you. Before I left Jolliginki, my august father, the king, told me to be sure and travel plenty. You are a man of great studiosity. To see the world in your company is an opportunity not to be sneezed upon. No, no, indeed." "How did you like the life at Oxford?" asked the doctor. "Oh, passably, passably," said Bumpo. "I liked it all except the algebra and the shoes. The algebra hurt my head, and the shoes hurt my feet. I threw the shoes over a wall as soon as I got out of the college quadrilateral this morning. And the algebra I am happily forgetting very fast. I liked Cicero. Yes, I think Cicero's fine. So simultaneous. By the way, they tell me his son is rowing for our college next year. Charming fellow." The doctor looked down at the black man's huge bare feet thoughtfully for a moment. "Well," he said slowly, There is something in what you say, Bumpo, about getting education from the world as well as from the college. And if you are really sure that you want to come, we shall be delighted to have you. Because, to tell you the truth, I think you are exactly the man we need. End of Part 3, Chapter 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ada Kerman, Portland, Oregon, USA. The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting. Part 3, Chapter 2. Goodbye. 2 days after that, we had all in readiness for our departure. On this voyage, Jip begged so hard to be taken that the doctor finally gave in and said he could come. Polynesia and Chi-Chi were the only other animals to go with us. Dab-Dab was left in charge of the house and the animal family we were to leave behind. Of course, as is always the way, at the last moment we kept remembering things we had forgotten. And when we finally closed the house up and went down the steps to the road, we were all burdened with armfuls of odd packages. Halfway to the river, the doctor suddenly remembered that he had left the stock pot boiling on the kitchen fire. However, we saw a blackbird flying by who nested in our garden, and the doctor asked her to go back for us and tell Dab-Dab about it. Down at the river wall, we found a great crowd waiting to see us off. Standing right near the gangplank were my mother and father. I hoped that they would not make a scene or burst into tears or anything like that. But as a matter of fact, they behaved quite well, for parents. My mother said something about being sure not to get my feet wet, and my father just smiled a crooked sort of smile, patted me on the back, and wished me luck. Goodbyes are awfully uncomfortable things, and I was glad when it was over and we passed on to the ship. We were a little surprised not to see Matthew Mugg among the crowd. We had felt sure that he would be there, and the doctor had intended to give him some extra instructions about the food for the animals we had left at the house. At last, after much pulling and tugging, we got the anchor up and undid a lot of mooring ropes. Then the curlew began to move gently down the river with the outrunning tide, while the people on the wall cheered and waved their handkerchiefs. We bumped into 1 or 2 other boats getting out into the stream, and at one sharp bend in the river we got stuck on a mud bank for a few minutes. But, though the people on the shore seemed to get very excited at these things, the doctor did not appear to be disturbed by them in the least. "These little accidents will happen in the most carefully regulated voyages," he said as he leaned over the side and fished for his boots, which had got stuck in the mud while we were pushing off. "Sailing is much easier when you get out into the open sea. There aren't so many silly things to bump into." For me, indeed, it was a great and wonderful feeling, that getting out into the open sea, when at length we passed the little lighthouse at the mouth of the river and found ourselves free of the land. It was also new and different, just the sky above you and sea below. This ship, which was to be our house and our street, our home and our garden for so many days to come, seemed so tiny in all this wide water. So tiny and yet so snug, sufficient, and safe. I looked around me and took in a deep breath. The doctor was at the wheel steering the boat, which was now leaping and plunging gently through the waves. I had expected to feel seasick at first, but was delighted to find that I didn't. Bumpo had been told off to go downstairs and prepare dinner for us. Chi-Chi was coiling up ropes in the stern and laying them in neat piles. My work was fastening down the things on the deck so that nothing could roll about if the weather should grow rough when we got further from the land. Jip was up in the peak of the boat with ears cocked and nose stuck out, like a statue, so still, his keen old eyes keeping a sharp lookout for floating wrecks, sandbars, and other dangers. Each one of us had some special job to do, part of the proper running of a ship. Even old Polynesia was taking the sea's temperature with the doctor's bath thermometer tied on the end of a string to make sure there were no icebergs near us. As I listened to her swearing softly to herself because she couldn't read the pesky figures in the fading light, I realized that the voyage had begun in earnest and that very soon it would be night, my first night at sea. End of Part 3, Chapter 2.